Welcome back to Void of Fears. Before we jump into today's story, I've got to ask for a quick favour. If you could smash that like button, drop a comment below, and hit subscribe if you haven't already. It seriously makes a huge difference. YouTube's algorithm loves that stuff, and it pushes my videos to new viewers who might dig these stories too. I really appreciate every single one of you who takes the time to do that. It means the world to me and helps keep this channel growing. Alright, enough of me rambling. Let's dive into today's story. My name is Walter Brennan, and for 54 years I've carried a secret that's eaten away at me like acid through metal. I'm 83 years old now, and the doctors tell me I don't have much time left. Cancer, they say. Stage 4, metastasized to my bones and liver. Funny how something so small, just a few rebel cells, can kill you when I've spent half a century terrified of something so vast it defies comprehension. I worked at NASA during what everyone calls the golden age of space exploration. Mission control in Houston, 1968 to 1974. Those were heady days, let me tell you. We put men on the moon. We did the impossible. Every morning, I'd drive to work past the guard station, show my badge with that distinctive blue stripe that marked me as essential personnel, and feel like I was part of something that mattered, something that would echo through history long after we were all dust. But history, I've learned, is a carefully curated lie. The real story, the true story, gets buried under layers of classification stamps and convenient narratives, and the bodies of people who asked too many questions. I was a telecommunications engineer, which is a fancy way of saying I listened to radios all day, but that makes it sound simple, and it wasn't. My job was to monitor the communication channels between Earth and whatever spacecraft we had up there, threading through hundreds of frequencies, distinguishing signal from noise, catching the faintest whisper of human voices from 250,000 miles away. It sounds tedious when I describe it like that, but it wasn't. Every crackle of static, every burst of interference, every whispered transmission felt like magic, like I was catching messages from another world. I was good at it too, better than good. I could tell you what kind of solar activity was happening just by the quality of the signal degradation, could distinguish between a genuine equipment malfunction and normal cosmic interference just by the timbre and rhythm of the static. I knew the difference between ionospheric distortion and magnetospheric compression. I could identify which tracking station on Earth was having calibration issues based solely on the phase variance in their relay signals. I could hear harmonics in the carrier waves that most people couldn't detect, even with oscilloscope visualization. My colleague, Leonard Pritchard, used to joke that I could hear a pin drop in space. Leonard was the overnight shift supervisor, a tall man with prematurely grey hair that had gone completely silver by the time he was 35, and a nervous habit of clicking his pen 3 times whenever he was thinking hard about something. We'd work the long hours together, drinking terrible coffee from styrofoam cups that left a waxy residue on your lips, smoking Marlboros that probably killed more of us than the Soviets ever could have. Leonard had a wife named Grace and 2 daughters, Emily and Charlotte, ages 7 and 9. I remember because he kept their picture taped to his console, right next to the frequency charts. It was a professional photo, the kind you get at Sears, and in it Grace was wearing a yellow dress and the girls had matching ribbons in their hair. Leonard would sometimes tell me stories about them during the quiet hours, about Emily's dance recitals and how she could do 15 pirouettes without getting dizzy, about Charlotte's collection of rocks that she kept in a shoebox under her bed, each one carefully labelled with masking tape and her careful child's handwriting. I had a family too, Dorothy, my wife, who I married in 1965 after a courtship that lasted exactly 4 months. She was a secretary at an accounting firm, had the most beautiful laugh I'd ever heard, like music. By 1970, we had 2 little boys, Michael and Stephen, ages 5 and 3. Dorothy used to pack my lunch in a metal lunchbox with a thermos of soup, usually tomato or chicken noodle. She'd tuck little notes inside sometimes, written on scraps of paper torn from her grocery list pad. Come home safe, or the boys miss you, or sometimes just a little heart drawn in pencil. I kept every single one of them. They're in a shoebox in my closet right now. The paper yellowed and brittle, the pencil marks fading to ghost impressions. Sometimes I take them out and read them, trying to remember what it felt like to be young and in love and blissfully unaware of how dark the universe really is. Our life was normal, beautifully, wonderfully normal. I'd come home from work around 11:30 p.m. after the evening shift, and Dorothy would have left a plate for me in the oven, covered with aluminum foil. I'd eat quietly at the kitchen table, not wanting to wake the family, then slip into bed next to my sleeping wife. In the mornings, I'd wake to the sound of the boys arguing about something, the smell of coffee brewing, Dorothy singing softly to herself as she made breakfast. On weekends, we'd go to the park or visit Dorothy's parents in Galveston, where her father would take the boys fishing off the pier, while Dorothy and her mother talked about recipes and garden clubs and all the normal things that normal people talked about. We were building something, you understand. A life. A future. The American dream in a 3-bedroom house with a chain-link fence and a station wagon in the driveway. Everything changed in April of 1970. It started small, the way these things always do. Saturday, April 4th. I came in for my shift at 3 p.m, punching my time card at the front desk before heading down the long corridor to the communications bay. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, that electrical hum that becomes such a part of your environment you stop hearing it. But that day, something felt different. The air had a weight to it, a tension that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. You know that feeling you get right before a thunderstorm, when the atmospheric pressure drops and everything feels heavy and charged? It was like that, but worse. Like the building itself was holding its breath. I noticed unusual activity in the high security section, the area where the administrators and top brass had their offices. There were military personnel there, but not the usual Air Force liaison officers we'd see from time to time. These men were different. Army, based on their uniforms, but with no unit insignia or name tags. They moved with purpose, carrying sealed cases made of brushed aluminum with combination locks, and they didn't make eye contact with anyone. They didn't talk to each other either, just moved through the building like ghosts on a mission, their faces blank and professional. I relieved the day shift operator, a friendly kid named Timothy Aldrich, who was 23 and saving up money to go back to school for electrical engineering. Anything unusual? I asked him, the standard handoff question we always asked. He glanced around, then leaned in close. His breath smelled like the peppermints he constantly sucked on. Military brass been here since noon. Something big is happening, but nobody's saying what. His voice dropped even lower. And Walter, they've been asking questions about the overnight shifts, about who monitors what frequencies and when. They had a roster, like they were checking off names. That struck me as odd, but I didn't say anything. Timothy gathered his things and left, giving me one last worried look, before he walked out the door. I watched him go, wondering what he was so nervous about. I didn't know then that I'd never see him alive again. 6 months later, Timothy Aldrich would drown in Lake Travis during what the police called a tragic boating accident, even though everyone who knew him said he was an excellent swimmer and had grown up around water. Leonard arrived around 6 p.m, earlier than his usual midnight start time. His face was drawn, and there were dark circles under his eyes like he hadn't slept in days. His hands trembled slightly as he set down his coffee cup, and I noticed his pen clicking had accelerated to a nervous staccato. During one of our coffee breaks around 8 p.m, standing in the break room with its vending machines and bulletin board, covered in safety notices and a faded poster encouraging us to buy savings bonds, he leaned against the counter and said, You see those army boys earlier?" "Hard to miss them," I said, stirring powdered creamer into my coffee and watching it swirl like a tiny galaxy. "Any idea what they're doing here?" He glanced at the break room door, making sure it was closed, then at the observation window that looked out onto the hallway. When he was satisfied we were alone, he spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "Protocol changes came down yesterday. New encryption codes, completely different from anything we've used before, and we're supposed to monitor additional frequencies now, ones that aren't in any manual I've ever seen, and I've been doing this for 8 years. Soviet channels? That would make sense, given the Cold War paranoia that infected everything we did. Half of NASA's budget justification to Congress relied on the argument that we needed to beat the Russians, needed to prove American technological superiority. I don't think so. The frequency ranges are all wrong. Too high, too narrow. They're in bands that shouldn't have any traffic at all. Dead zones, basically. The kind of frequencies you'd use if you wanted to broadcast something without anyone accidentally stumbling across it. He clicked his pen 3 times, that nervous tell. And get this, Walter. We're not supposed to log anything we hear on them. Just monitor and report verbally to shift command if we pick up anything unusual. No written records. No documentation. Nothing. I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. That's not protocol. That's not how we do things. I know, but those are the orders. Came from someone way up the chain. Not our usual supervisors. Someone I've never even heard of. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and showed it to me. It was a memo typed on NASA letterhead, but instead of the usual administrative signature, it just said Authority Level 7. I'd never seen that designation before. In our line of work, documentation is everything. Every transmission, every burst of static, every time an astronaut clears his throat or adjusts his equipment. The documentation is how you track problems, how you prevent disasters, how you build institutional knowledge. We had filing cabinets full of logs going back to the Mercury program. Telling us not to write things down was like telling a doctor not to keep medical records or a pilot not to file a flight plan. It went against every principle we operated under, every safety protocol we developed through years of trial and error and occasional tragedy. The next day, Sunday, I came in for my regular shift and found a locked filing cabinet in our communications bay. 4 feet tall, grey metal, with a combination lock that none of us had the code to. There was a memo taped to the front, typed on official NASA letterhead. Authorized personnel only. Do not attempt to open. Violators will be subject to immediate dismissal and possible federal prosecution. No explanation of what was inside. No list of who the authorized personnel were. Just that stark warning, printed in all capitals like someone was shouting at us through the typewriter. I asked my immediate supervisor, a man named Gerald Hopkins, who'd been with NASA since the Mercury program and had a reputation for being fair and approachable, about the cabinet. He looked at me with tired eyes and said, "Don't ask questions about things that don't concern you, Walter. Just do your job." That wasn't like Gerald. He was usually approachable, friendly, the kind of supervisor who'd take time to explain things and make sure you understood the bigger picture. He'd helped me work through some complex signal analysis problems when I first started, had recommended me for my promotion, had even come to Michael's 3rd birthday party, but now he looked defeated, worn down by something I couldn't see. His shoulders slumped, and there was a tremor in his voice that I'd never heard before. "Gerald, is everything okay?" I asked. "You seem—" "I'm fine," he interrupted. "Everything's fine. Just focus on your work, Walter. That's all any of us can do now. Just focus on the work and don't think about anything else." Over the next week, the tension in mission control grew thick enough to cut with a knife. Our supervisors looked increasingly exhausted, with dark circles under their eyes and a distracted quality to their movements. I'd catch them having whispered conversations in corners, in stairwells, in empty offices, Conversations that would stop the instant anyone else walked by, leaving only awkward silence and guilty expressions and the feeling that you'd interrupted something you weren't supposed to witness. The military presence increased too. By Wednesday, April 8th, there were at least 20 men in uniform, stationed throughout the building, always in pairs, always watching. They didn't interfere with our work, but you could feel their presence like a weight on your shoulders. They'd stand at the ends of hallways, sit in corners of the cafeteria, position themselves near exits, watching, always watching. I started noticing that certain people, certain engineers and administrators, would get pulled aside for brief conversations with these military men. The conversations never lasted long, maybe 30 seconds, but the people who had them always came back looking shaken. Leonard started acting strangely too. He'd jump at sudden noises, spilling his coffee or dropping his pen. I caught him staring at the locked filing cabinet more than once, like he was trying to see through the metal with sheer force of will. His hands had developed a tremor that he tried to hide by keeping them in his pockets or gripping his coffee cup tightly. Thursday night, April 9th, I found him in the parking lot after our shift, sitting in his car with the engine off, just staring straight ahead through the windshield. The parking lot lights cast harsh shadows across his face, making him look older, haggard. I knocked on the window. He jumped, then rolled it down with shaking hands. "You okay, Leonard?" He looked at me for a long moment, and I could see fear in his eyes. Real fear. The kind that makes your pupils dilate, and your voice shake and your body prepare for fight or flight. "Walter, if anything happens to me, if I disappear or have an accident or anything, I need you to promise me something." "What are you talking about?" "Promise me you'll look after Grace and the girls. Make sure they're okay. Make sure they're safe. Can you promise me that?" "Leonard, you're scaring me. What's going on? What do you know?" He shook his head. "I can't tell you. I wish I could, but I can't. They made it very clear what would happen if I talked. But Walter, listen to me. Keep your nose clean and your mouth shut. Don't ask questions. Don't dig into things. And whatever you hear over the next couple weeks, whatever comes through on those frequencies, just report it and forget it. Don't think about it. Don't try to understand it. Don't write it down. Just forget." "How can I forget something if I don't know what it is yet?" "You'll know when you hear it, and when you do, you'll understand why I'm telling you this. Promise me, Walter. Promise me you'll forget." He rolled up the window and drove away, leaving me standing there in the parking lot under the sodium lights, more unsettled than I'd ever been in my life. I watched his taillights disappear into the darkness, and I had this terrible premonition that I was watching something important slip away, that I should have said more, done more, but I didn't know what. The next day, Friday, April 10th, I tried to talk to him again, but he avoided me. He'd find excuses to be in different parts of the building, would take his breaks at different times. When I finally cornered him in the hallway outside the communications bay, he just looked at me with those haunted eyes and said, "Please, Walter, leave it alone. For your family's sake. For Dorothy and the boys, leave it alone." Then Apollo 13 launched. Saturday, April 11th, 1970, 2:13 p.m. Central Time. I wasn't on shift for the actual launch, but I watched from the observation room along with dozens of other off-duty personnel. We gathered around the television sets, watching the coverage from Kennedy Space Center in Florida. The Saturn V rocket stood on the launch pad like a white spire reaching toward heaven, venting oxygen vapor that caught the sunlight and glowed like a ghost. Walter Cronkite was narrating the coverage, his voice calm and authoritative. The countdown proceeded smoothly. 10, 9, 8. The first stage engines ignited, creating a flower of flame at the rocket's base. 3, 2, 1. The hold-down arms released, and that massive vehicle, taller than a 30-story building and weighing 6 million pounds, began to lift off the pad with agonizing slowness before accelerating into the sky on a pillar of fire and thunder. Commander Jim Lovell, Command Module Pilot Jack Swigert, and Lunar Module Pilot Fred Hayes. 3 men heading to the moon for what was supposed to be America's 3rd lunar landing. The mission patch showed Apollo's chariot pulled by 3 horses, bringing light and knowledge to humanity. For Amaro, that was their destination, a highland region of the moon where they'd set up scientific experiments and collect rock samples that might tell us about the moon's formation. Everyone cheered when the rocket cleared the tower. We were good at this now. Apollo 11 and 12 had been successful. This was becoming routine, or as routine as shooting people to the moon could ever be. Some people were already talking about cutting the program short, about how maybe we'd proven our point and didn't need to keep spending billions of dollars on moon rocks. But I noticed something. Among the cheering and applause, some of the senior administrators weren't celebrating. They stood at the back of the room, faces grave, hands clasped behind their backs. They looked like mourners at a funeral, not witnesses to a triumph of human achievement. One of them, a man I didn't recognize with silver hair and a military bearing, was speaking quietly into a telephone. His face turned away from the celebration. I caught his eye for just a moment. He looked at me, and there was something in his expression that sent a chill down my spine. Not anger or suspicion, but pity. Like he felt sorry for me, for reasons I couldn't understand. For the first 50 hours, everything was routine. Beautifully, boringly routine. The astronauts conducted their planned activities, sent back television broadcasts showing them floating in zero gravity, made jokes about the spacecraft being their own private country club. Jack Swigert did a demonstration of how water behaves in zero gravity, forming perfect floating spheres. Jim Lovell gave a tour of the command module, showing viewers at home the cramped quarters where 3 men would live for 8 days. Fred Hayes talked about the scientific experiments they'd conduct on the lunar surface, his voice filled with enthusiasm. I monitored their communications during my shifts, listening to their voices crackling across the void, and felt that familiar pride in what we were accomplishing. This was humanity at its best, reaching out beyond our little world, expanding our knowledge and our capabilities. But I was also monitoring those new frequencies, the ones we weren't supposed to log, the encrypted channels that shouldn't have any traffic. For 2 days, they were silent. Just empty bandwidth, the white noise of space, the cosmic background radiation that's been echoing through the universe since the beginning of time. I'd sweep through them during my routine checks, note nothing unusual, and move on. That changed on Monday evening, April 13th. I came in for the 3 p.m. shift, punching in at 2:52 p.m. and grabbing a cup of coffee before heading to my station. I was relieving Douglas Webster, a quiet man in his 50s who'd worked at NASA since the Gemini program. Doug had a reputation for being unflappable, the kind of guy who could handle any crisis with calm professionalism. When I got to the communications bay, I found him sitting at his console, headphones on, staring at nothing. His face was pale, almost grey, and there was a sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the climate-controlled environment. His hands gripped the edge of the console so tightly his knuckles were white. "Doug, you okay?" He jumped like I'd shot him, yanking off his headphones with such force that one of the ear cushions tore. For a moment, he just stared at me, and I could see his hands were shaking. There was something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Terror. Raw, primal terror. "Walter, yeah, I'm fine, just tired, very tired. Anything to report?" He looked at me for a long moment, and I could see him struggling with something. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. His lips moved like he was trying to form words, but couldn't quite make them come out. Finally, he said, "Just stay alert, Walter, and if you hear anything strange, anything at all, you report it immediately. Don't think about it. Don't try to analyze it. Don't try to understand it. Just report it and move on. Understand? What kind of strange things? You'll know. His voice cracked slightly. God help you, you'll know when you hear it. Don't make the same mistake I did. Don't listen too long. Don't try to make sense of it. Your brain will try to find patterns. Try to understand, but that's the worst thing you can do. Just report it and move on. But he was already gathering his things, shoving papers into his briefcase with jerky, panicked movements. I have to go. I need to get out of here. I need to go home and be with my wife. I need to... He trailed off, grabbed his coat, and left, practically running, for the exit. His briefcase wasn't even closed properly. Papers were sticking out of it. I watched him go, that cold weight settling in my stomach again. I'd known Doug Webster for 2 years, had worked dozens of shifts with him. I'd never seen him like this. I'd never seen anyone like this. I settled into my station, adjusting the chair to my preferred height, arranging my coffee cup and notepad within easy reach. The console in front of me was a complex array of dials, switches, and oscilloscope screens showing various waveforms. Above me, speakers mounted in the ceiling carried the main communication channel from Apollo 13, currently broadcasting routine telemetry checks. I put on my headset, those heavy padded cans that pressed against your ears and shut out the world, and began my usual checks. The main Apollo 13 frequency was clear and strong. The astronauts were in good spirits, joking about something. Jack Swigert was teasing Jim Lovell about his coffee-making technique in zero gravity, saying it tasted like motor oil. Lovell was defending his brewing methodology with mock seriousness. Normal, everyday conversation between men, doing an extraordinary job. I smiled, listening to them. These men had ice water in their veins. They made shooting to the moon sound as casual as driving to the grocery store. I spent the next 3 hours monitoring routine transmissions, documenting everything in my logbook, occasionally switching to backup frequencies to verify signal strength. Everything was nominal, to use NASA's favorite word. Nominal and boring, and exactly how we liked it. Around 6 p.m, as the sun was setting outside, and the evening shift was settling into their rhythm, I started my sweep of the secondary frequencies. This was part of my regular routine, checking channels that should be empty, just to verify our equipment was working correctly and we weren't missing anything. Most of them were empty, as expected, just the hiss of static, the whisper of the cosmos. But when I hit the new encrypted channels, the ones we'd been told to monitor, something made me pause. There was static, but it was different, thicker somehow. It pulsed in waves, rising and falling, with an almost organic rhythm, like breathing, like something huge and distant was breathing through my headphones. I adjusted the frequency, fine-tuning it, thinking maybe I was catching some interference from a commercial satellite or a radio telescope. But the signal didn't change. If anything, it got stronger, more focused. The pulsing became more regular, more deliberate. Then, underneath the static, I heard a voice. No, not voice, voices. Multiple voices speaking at once, overlapping and interweaving, like a braid made of sound. They were speaking English, I could tell that much, but the words didn't make sense. They weren't random, though. There was a cadence to them, a rhythm and structure that suggested meaning, even if I couldn't grasp what that meaning was. It was like listening to a conversation in a language you almost understand, where you can pick out individual words but can't quite piece together what they're trying to say. My heart started pounding. I grabbed my notepad and started transcribing, my hand shaking so badly I could barely hold the pen. Returning vessel stone cold, counting backward metal. Tastes like yesterday. The voices continued, still overlapping, still wrong. It was like listening to 3 or 4 people recite different parts of the same poem simultaneously, but the poem had been written by someone who only half understood how language worked. Or maybe someone who understood it too well, who was speaking in some higher dimension of meaning that my three-dimensional brain couldn't quite process. 7 minutes until the door closes, Father brought something back. We told him not to touch it. I checked the signal strength meters. Strong, very strong. Stronger than it should be for interference or atmospheric skip. The needles were pegged near the top of their range, indicating a transmission with significant power behind it. This was a focused transmission from somewhere in deep space, not random noise or equipment malfunction. I checked the directional antenna readings, using the triangulation protocols I'd memorized from training. The signal was coming from the direction of the moon, but the inverse square law calculations suggested it was originating from much farther away. Past the moon, far past it. The signal strength didn't match the apparent distance, which was impossible. Either the source was much closer than the calculations suggested, or it was broadcasting with power levels that shouldn't be achievable. The voices spoke again. Swimming through the house counting fingers, wrong number, the walls remember. Then, silence. Just like that, the transmission cut off, leaving only the normal static. The change was so abrupt it made me flinch, like someone had slammed a door. I sat there staring at my notes, my heart hammering in my chest, like it was trying to escape. What the hell was that? It wasn't Soviet. The voices were American, I was certain of it. Not just American, but with accents that sounded old. Old American, like recordings from the 40s or 50s. The kind of voices you'd hear in wartime newsreels or radio dramas from before television took over. There was a formality to the speech patterns, a way of pronouncing certain vowels that you don't hear anymore. I reached for the phone to call my supervisor, but before my hand touched the receiver, alarms started blaring throughout Mission Control. The sound was deafening, a klaxon that cut through everything, accompanied by flashing red lights that turned the room into a nightmare. People were shouting, running to their stations, grabbing headphones, pulling up telemetry displays. The calm, professional atmosphere of Mission Control shattered in an instant, replaced by controlled chaos. Something had happened to Apollo 13. I yanked my headset back on and switched to the main channel. The first thing I heard was an explosion, a deep metallic bang that was immediately followed by the sound of alarms and warning buzzers from inside the spacecraft. Then Jim Lovell's voice, professional and calm, despite what must have been absolute chaos around him. "Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here." Jack Swigert's voice came through a moment later, slightly more urgent. "We've had a main B-bus undervolt." Gene Kranz, the flight director, responded immediately. "This is Houston. Say again, please." Jim Lovell, his voice steady as a rock. "Houston, we've had a problem. We've had a main B-bus undervolt." What followed was controlled chaos, but it was chaos nonetheless. The oxygen tank in the service module had exploded. The spacecraft was dying. 3 men were trapped in a crippled vehicle 250,000 miles from Earth, losing power and air with every passing second. Warning lights were flashing in the spacecraft, alarms were sounding, and the astronauts were going through emergency procedures, trying to understand what had just happened. This was NASA, though. We trained for disasters. Every person in Mission Control snapped into crisis mode, working the problem, running calculations, figuring out how to bring those 3 men home alive. Shift supervisors were calling in off-duty personnel. Engineers were pulling out contingency plans that we'd hoped we'd never need. Gene Kranz stood at the front of the room like a general, commanding an army, making decisions that would determine whether those astronauts lived or died. "Okay, let's everybody keep cool," Kranz said, his voice cutting through the noise. "Let's solve the problem, but let's not make it worse by guessing." I was part of it, monitoring communications, making sure we maintained contact with the spacecraft, adjusting frequencies to compensate for the damaged antenna arrays, listening to every word the astronauts said and relaying critical information to the engineering teams. But in the back of my mind, I kept thinking about those voices. That transmission had come through 3 hours before the explosion. 3 hours Was that a coincidence? It had to be. What else could it be? Except I couldn't shake the feeling that somehow, impossibly, those things were connected. The voices had said 7 minutes until the door closes. Not 3 hours, 7 minutes. But what if they weren't talking about our time? What if they were talking about some other kind of time, some countdown that didn't match our clocks? The night blurred into a marathon of coffee and calculations and desperate prayers. We powered down the command module to conserve what little battery power remained. The astronauts moved into the lunar module, a spacecraft designed for 2 men for 2 days, now their only refuge. We fired the lunar module's engines to get the spacecraft into a trajectory that would bring them back to Earth. We calculated every amp of power, every ounce of oxygen, every drop of water, figuring out how to make resources designed for 2 men for 2 days keep 3 men alive for 4. The numbers were brutal. The carbon dioxide scrubbers in the lunar module were designed for 2 people. With 3 people breathing, the CO2 levels would become dangerous within hours, then lethal. We needed to figure out how to adapt the square scrubber cartridges from the command module to fit the round receptacles in the lunar module, using only the materials the astronauts had on board. Plastic bags, tape, cardboard from the covers of their procedure manuals. Around 10 p.m, during a brief lull in the crisis management when the astronauts were setting up for a course correction burn, Leonard found me. He pulled me aside into a small equipment closet off the main floor, closed the door, and turned on me with wild eyes. "Did you hear it?" he whispered, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. His breath was coming in short gasps, like he'd been running. "Hear what?" "On the encrypted channels, around 6:15, did you hear it?" I nodded slowly, my mouth suddenly dry. I heard something. Voices. Couldn't make sense of what they were saying. Leonard closed his eyes and leaned back against the wall, looking like he might be sick. He was trembling, his whole body shaking. Jesus Christ, they told us it might happen. They told us to be ready. But I didn't believe them. I didn't want to believe them. I thought they were being paranoid, seeing threats where there weren't any. But they were right. Oh God, they were right. "Who told you, Leonard? What the hell is going on?" He opened his eyes and looked at me, and I saw something in his expression that terrified me more than the voices had. Defeat. Complete and utter defeat. The look of a man who's seen behind the curtain and realized that everything he believed was wrong. "I can't tell you everything. They'll kill me if I tell you everything. They'll kill Grace and the girls. They were very clear about that. Very specific about what would happen if I talked." "What do you mean they'll kill?" "Listen to me, Walter." He grabbed my shoulders, his fingers digging in hard enough to hurt. "What happened tonight? The explosion, it wasn't an accident." "What?" "It was the abort signal, the emergency extraction protocol. They sent Apollo 13 up there to investigate something, to get close to something, and when they got too close, when the transmission started, someone made the decision to blow the oxygen tank and bring them home. Better to lose the mission than lose the astronauts to whatever is out there." "That's insane. You're saying NASA deliberately crippled the spacecraft, killed the mission, put 3 men's lives at risk?" "I'm saying someone did. Maybe NASA, maybe someone higher up the chain, maybe some group that doesn't officially exist. I don't know who exactly, and I don't want to know. But the explosion wasn't an accident, Walter. It was too perfectly timed, too precisely damaging. It crippled the service module, but left the command module and lunar module intact enough to get home. That takes planning, precise engineering. You don't get that lucky with a random malfunction." I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. It was impossible. It was crazy. But the look in his eyes told me he believed it absolutely. "Apollo 11 heard them," Leonard continued, his voice dropping even lower. "Maybe Apollo 12 too, I don't know for sure. But that's what my contact told me. There were incidents that never made it into any report. Transmissions that got classified so far above top secret that most people don't even know there are classification levels that high. And now Apollo 13 was sent up there specifically to investigate, to make contact, to try to understand what was broadcasting on those frequencies. Contact with what? What's out there? I don't know. Nobody knows. That's why they sent Apollo 13. But when the transmission started coming through, when whatever it is started talking, someone decided we weren't ready. Someone decided it was too dangerous to continue. So they activated the failsafe. The explosion. Leonard released my shoulders and ran his hands through his hair. Walter, you need to understand something. Whatever you heard on those channels, you forget it. You report it like you're supposed to, but then you forget it. Don't think about it. Don't try to understand it. Don't investigate it. And for God's sake, don't talk about it to anyone outside this building. Not your wife, not your friends, not anyone. Do you understand? No, I don't understand. I don't understand any of this. How can I forget something like that? How can anyone forget hearing that? You learn. You force yourself. You think about other things. You focus on your family, your life, the normal, everyday things that matter. Because if you don't forget, if you keep asking questions, if you dig too deep. He trailed off, shaking his head. What? What happens? You disappear, Walter. That's what happens. You have an accident. You get transferred to Alaska or New Mexico or some other remote facility where you can't cause problems. Your family gets relocated. Your past gets erased. Or worse, much worse, you just stop existing. One day you're here, and the next day, it's like you never were. That's paranoid. That's... Timothy Aldrich heard the transmissions too, Leonard interrupted. 3 days ago during his shift. You know what his supervisor told him? Forget what you heard, and maybe you'll live to see 24. Timothy laughed it off. Thought it was a joke. Do you think he's laughing now? I thought about Timothy, how nervous he'd been when I relieved him, how he'd looked back over his shoulder as he left. What are you saying? I'm saying Timothy Aldrich is going to have an accident. Maybe next month, maybe next year. But it's coming. They're going to wait long enough that it doesn't look suspicious. And then he's going to die. Car crash, drowning, house fire, doesn't matter. He'll be gone. And so will everyone else who heard those transmissions and didn't take the warning seriously. Leonard pulled open the closet door and looked out, checking to make sure no one had seen us. I have to get back to my station. Just remember what I told you. Forget what you heard. Focus on your work. Go home to your family. Be grateful for every normal day you get. And Walter, don't try to contact me outside of work. Don't call my house. Don't visit. If they're watching me, which they probably are, I don't want them to think we're conspiring about something. He slipped out, leaving me standing there in the dark closet, surrounded by spare equipment and coils of cable, more confused and frightened than I'd ever been in my life. Over the next 4 days, the world watched as NASA worked to bring the Apollo 13 astronauts home. It was a race against time, against physics, against the cold emptiness of space itself. The service module was crippled. The command module was powered down to conserve energy, its systems running on the bare minimum to keep it alive. The 3 men were huddled in the Lunar Module Aquarius, a spacecraft designed to support 2 men for 2 days, now somehow having to keep 3 men alive for 4 days. It was a miracle of engineering and human determination. Every person in mission control was working 18, 20-hour shifts. We barely slept. We barely ate. The cafeteria started staying open 24 hours, serving coffee and sandwiches to engineers who hadn't been home in days. All that mattered was bringing those men home. I'd catch snatches of sleep in my car, parked in the lot, my head against the steering wheel. 20 minutes here, 30 minutes there. When I did go home, around 2 a.m. one night, I found Dorothy waiting up for me. She'd made coffee and sat me down at the kitchen table. "Walter, what's happening? You look terrible. You look like you haven't slept in days." "I haven't, not really. We're trying to bring the astronauts home and it's..." I trailed off, too exhausted to find the words. She took my hand. "I know you're doing important work. I know those men are depending on you. But you're no good to anyone if you collapse from exhaustion. Promise me you'll try to rest. Promise me you'll take care of yourself." I promised, but it was a lie. I couldn't rest. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard those voices. Every time I drifted towards sleep, I'd jerk awake, convinced I was missing something important. Convinced that the astronauts were dying while I slept. But while everyone else was focused on the rescue, I was hearing things that no one else seemed to notice. Or if they noticed, they weren't talking about it. The transmissions continued. Not every day, but regularly enough that I knew they weren't accidents or equipment malfunctions. They always came on the encrypted frequencies, always during my shift, or Leonard's overnight shift. Always that same overlapping quality, like listening to a conversation where 3 or 4 people were talking at once, but instead of interrupting each other, they were speaking in perfect synchronization. Tuesday night, around 11:30 p.m. The astronauts were asleep, or trying to sleep, in the freezing spacecraft. The temperature had dropped to near freezing to conserve power. I was alone in the communications bay. Everyone else focused on calculations and engineering problems. I did my routine sweep, and there it was again. Swimming through the house, counting fingers, wrong number, wrong number. The walls remember what we forgot. I transcribed it in my secret notebook, the small spiral-bound pad I kept in my jacket pocket. This was the 3rd transmission. I was starting to see patterns, repetitions of certain phrases. Counting backward appeared frequently. Wrong number came up twice now. Metal was mentioned in different contexts. Father brought something back had appeared in the 1st transmission. I pulled out all my notes and spread them on my console, looking for connections, trying to understand what these fragmenting messages were trying to convey. Transmission 1. Returning vessel stone cold, counting backward metal. Tastes like yesterday. 7 minutes until the door closes. Father brought something back, we told him not to touch it. Transmission 2. Swimming through the house, counting fingers. Wrong number, wrong number. The walls remember. Transmission 3. Swimming through the house, counting fingers. Wrong number, wrong number. The walls remember what we forgot. There was repetition, almost like the transmissions were building on each other, adding information with each broadcast. And that phrase, "Father brought something back," kept nagging at me. Who was the father? What did he bring back? From where? Wednesday evening, 7:45 p.m. The astronauts were running through procedures for the course correction burn that would fine-tune their trajectory towards Earth. Mission control was tense but focused. I heard, "The walls remember what we forgot. Bring them back, bring them back. The door is closing." Bring them back. That was new. Bring who back? The astronauts or someone else? Someone who'd gone before and never returned. Thursday morning, 4:20 a.m. I'd pulled an extra shift, volunteered to cover for someone who'd collapsed from exhaustion and been sent home by the flight surgeon. Leonard was there too, and I saw him jerk when the transmission came through. His hands flew across his console, adjusting frequencies, and I knew he was hearing it too. "Navigation error, 3 degrees. We've been here before. Metal forest underground, turn back, turn back." Our eyes met across the room. He shook his head slightly. A warning. Don't acknowledge it. Don't react. Just document and move on. But I couldn't move on. These weren't random transmissions. They were structured, purposeful. Someone or something was trying to communicate, trying to warn us. And that phrase, "navigation error 3 degrees," suggested This wasn't the first time someone who had gone off course had ended up in the wrong place. What if Apollo 11 or 12 had experienced a navigation error? What if they'd travelled 3 degrees off their intended course and encountered something? And what if someone, or something from those missions, was trying to warn us not to make the same mistake? I started keeping a more detailed log, writing down every transmission word for word, noting the exact time and frequency, trying to find patterns in the signal strength and duration. I knew I was violating orders, but I needed to understand what was happening. I needed to know if we'd put those astronauts in danger, if we'd sent them towards something we didn't understand. The voices sounded desperate, frightened, like they were trying to warn someone about something, but couldn't quite articulate what. The fragmented nature of the messages suggested they were having trouble communicating, like they were trying to speak across some vast distance or through some medium that distorted their words. And that business about "we've been here before" and "navigation error 3 degrees" kept bothering me. It implied previous missions had encountered whatever was sending these signals. It implied that someone before Apollo 13 had gone off course, had found something, maybe had brought something back. Friday morning, around 9:30 a.m. I was operating on no sleep and too much coffee, my eyes burning and my hands shaking from exhaustion and nervous energy. The astronauts were preparing for the final course correction burn before beginning their approach to Earth. Another transmission. Father brought something back. We told him not to touch it now the house is full of doors, counting backward from the place we shouldn't have gone. Father brought something back. There it was again. And the house is full of doors. What did that mean? I thought about the spacecraft, the command module, and lunar module, and service module, all connected together. Was that the house, with the different modules the doors? Or was it something else entirely? Something my three-dimensional brain couldn't quite grasp. I pulled out a star chart and tried to plot the trajectory of Apollo 11 and 12, looking for places where a 3-degree navigation error might have taken them. There were several possibilities, but without access to the classified flight data, I couldn't verify anything. I thought about asking Leonard, but I remembered his warning about not making contact outside of work, about not giving them any reason to think we were conspiring. So I kept my questions to myself and continued my own investigation. On Wednesday night, April 15th, I made a decision that would haunt me for the rest of my life. I brought a personal tape recorder to work, hidden in my lunchbox under the thermos of soup Dorothy had packed for me. It was a small, portable unit, nothing fancy, the kind teenagers used to record songs off the radio. I bought it at a pawn shop on my way to work, paying cash, giving a fake name. During my shift, when no one was looking, I set it up next to my communications equipment, positioning the microphone near the speaker output. I left it running, hidden behind a stack of technical manuals, recording everything that came through my station. I caught one of the transmissions. A long one, maybe 45 seconds of overlapping voices before it cut off. The longest transmission yet. When I got home that night around 2:30 a.m, Dorothy was asleep upstairs. I went down to the basement, put on my headphones and listened to the tape. I wish to God I hadn't. The overlapping voices were even more pronounced on the recording, like the tape somehow captured layers that my ears had filtered out in real time. But more than that, there was something underneath the voices. Something I hadn't heard during the live transmission. A sound like wind through a tunnel, or water rushing through pipes, and occasionally, very faintly, something that might have been breathing. Not human breathing. Too slow, too deep. Each breath seemed to last 15 or 20 seconds. In and out, with a wet quality that made my skin crawl. Like something was breathing through fluid, or like lungs that were damaged, corrupted somehow. The voices themselves were clearer on the tape too, though no less confusing. 7 minutes until the door closes, Father brought something back. We told him not to touch it. Metal tastes like yesterday, counting backward from the place we shouldn't have gone, the walls. Remember what we forgot, wrong number, wrong number. Then, something new, something I hadn't heard during the live transmission. The voices dropped to a whisper, becoming almost childlike in their fear, taking on a quality that was heartbreaking in its vulnerability. Tell them to turn back, tell them not to look. Tell them we're sorry. We're so sorry it hurts to remember, but we have to remember counting backwards 7, 6, 5, 4. Then, that breathing sound again, louder this time, closer, and underneath it, so faint I almost missed it. Something that might have been machinery, gears turning, metal scraping against metal. All of it echoing, like it was happening in a vast enclosed space. Or maybe not machinery at all, but something organic that just sounded mechanical. Something that didn't quite fit into either category. The transmission ended with a burst of static so loud I had to yank the headphones off. When I looked at the tape recorder, I saw that the recording level meters had been pegged at maximum. The needles pressed against their stops. I listened to that tape 3 times that night, and by the end, I was shaking so hard I had to sit down on the concrete basement floor, my back against the cold cinder block wall. Dorothy found me there an hour later, the tape recorder still sitting on the workbench, the headphones lying on the floor. "Walter, honey, what's wrong? What are you doing down here? It's almost 4 in the morning." I looked up at her, standing at the bottom of the stairs in her bathrobe, her hair mussed from sleep, concern etched on her face. My wife, the mother of my children, living a normal life in a normal house, in a normal suburb, completely unaware that something impossible was happening in the darkness beyond our little planet. Something that had tried to communicate with us, had tried to warn us, and that we were systematically ignoring and covering up. "Just a hard day at work," I lied, my voice rough and shaking. "The astronauts, you know, the stress of trying to bring them home. It's getting to me." She came over and helped me up, her hands warm and solid and real. "Come to bed. You need sleep. You're going to make yourself sick if you keep this up. The boys hardly see you anymore. Michael asked me yesterday if you were going to come home tonight." "They're going to be okay," I said, following her up the stairs. "The astronauts. We're going to bring them home. We always bring them home." But that wasn't the question that was keeping me awake. The question was, what were they coming home to? What had they seen out there? What had they been sent to investigate? And what had seen them? I followed Dorothy upstairs and got into bed, but I didn't sleep. I lay there in the darkness, listening to her breathing beside me, thinking about those voices. Tell them to turn back. Turn back from what? Apollo 13 wasn't going to the moon anymore. The explosion had seen to that. They were in a desperate loop around the lunar surface, using the moon's gravity to slingshot them back towards Earth. Unless that's exactly what someone or something wanted. What if the explosion wasn't meant to kill them? What if it was meant to bring them home before they got too close to something? Before they saw something they shouldn't see? Before they made contact with whatever was broadcasting those warnings? The voices had said 7 minutes until the door closes. What door? And what happened when it closed? Would we be locked out, or would something be locked in? I must have dozed off eventually because I woke to sunlight streaming through the bedroom window and the smell of coffee brewing downstairs. Thursday morning. The astronauts were still out there, still fighting for their lives. I had another shift starting in 6 hours. I went downstairs and found Dorothy making breakfast. Michael and Stephen were at the table, eating cereal and arguing about which superhero would win in a fight. Normal family sounds. Normal family life. "Daddy." Stephen ran over and hugged my legs. "Are you home now? Can we play?" I picked him up, feeling the solid weight of him in my arms. 3 years old, with Dorothy's eyes and my stubborn chin. "I have to go back to work soon, buddy. But maybe this weekend, when the astronauts are home safe, we can go to the park. Would you like that?" He nodded enthusiastically, then went back to his cereal and his argument with Michael about whether Superman or Batman was stronger. Dorothy handed me a cup of coffee. You were talking in your sleep last night. Something about counting backward and doors closing. Are you sure you're okay? Just stressed. It's been a hard week. She looked at me with those knowing eyes, the look that said she didn't quite believe me, but wasn't going to push. When this is over, when the astronauts are home, you should take some time off. We could go to Galveston, spend a week at the beach. The boys would love it. That sounds nice, I said, and meant it. A week at the beach, building sandcastles and collecting shells, and not thinking about voices from space or conspiracy theories or friends who warned me to forget what I'd heard. A week of being normal, of pretending that the universe was simple and comprehensible and didn't contain horrors beyond imagination. But I knew, even as I agreed to her plan, that I would never be able to truly relax again. That part of me would always be listening for those voices, always wondering what we'd encountered out there in the darkness between worlds. Friday, April 17th, 1970, Splashdown Day. I'd been awake for 28 hours straight by that point, running on coffee and adrenaline and the desperate hope that we were going to pull this off. The atmosphere in mission control was tense but optimistic. We'd done the impossible. Against all odds, we were bringing those men home. The command module had separated from the damage service module. For the first time, we got a good look at the extent of the damage through the command module's window, and it was horrifying. The entire side panel was blown out, revealing a tangled mess of wiring and metal and burned insulation. If the explosion had happened just a few feet in a different direction, it would have breached the crew compartment and killed all 3 astronauts instantly. Looks like she took a beating, Jim Lovell's voice came through, calm despite the devastating sight outside his window. The lunar module had been jettisoned. Aquarius, their lifeboat for 4 days, cast off to burn up in Earth's atmosphere. Now it was just the command module Odyssey, falling through space towards home. Now came the most dangerous part, re-entry. The command module would hit Earth's atmosphere at 25,000 miles per hour, protected by nothing but its heat shield. That heat shield had been exposed to the vacuum of space for 6 days, subjected to extreme temperature variations. If it had been damaged, if it failed during re-entry, the astronauts would be incinerated in an instant. Radio blackout during re-entry was normal, expected. The plasma surrounding the spacecraft during re-entry blocks all communications. We expected 3 minutes of silence while the spacecraft plunged through the atmosphere like a meteor. 3 minutes where those men would be on their own, wrapped in a fireball, hoping that the engineers had done their jobs correctly, that the heat shield would hold, that the parachutes would deploy. I watched the clock on the wall, counting the seconds. Around me, mission control was silent. Hundreds of people, all holding their breath, all praying to whatever gods they believed in. Gene Kranz stood at the front of the room, his jaw clenched, his hands gripping the edge of his console so hard, his knuckles were white. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. The clock kept ticking. 3 minutes 15 seconds. 3 minutes 30 seconds. The silence stretched like taffy, pulling thinner and thinner. People were starting to shift uncomfortably. We should have heard from them by now. We should have gotten confirmation that the parachutes had deployed. The tracking stations should be picking up their beacon. 4 minutes. 4 minutes of silence. That extra 60 seconds felt like an eternity. I watched Gene Kranz at the front of the room, his face like stone, refusing to give in to the fear that was creeping into everyone's mind. Had we lost them? Had we brought them all this way, solved all these impossible problems, only to lose them in the final moments? Then, like a miracle, Jack Swigert's voice crackled over the speakers. "Okay, Joe." The room erupted in cheers. They'd made it. The parachutes deployed. The command module splashed down in the Pacific Ocean at 1:07 p.m. and the recovery helicopter was already on its way. We'd done it. We'd brought them home. People were crying, hugging, shaking hands, Someone started passing around cigars. The tension that had gripped mission control for 4 days released all at once, leaving everyone giddy and exhausted and grateful. But something was wrong. I noticed it immediately. Maybe because I'd been watching for it, expecting something strange after everything I'd heard. Over the past 4 days, the medical team was moving too fast. Protocol called for a careful, methodical extraction from the spacecraft. The astronauts would be exhausted, disoriented, possibly suffering from exposure and dehydration and CO2 poisoning. You don't rush that process. You take your time, you check vitals, you make sure they're stable before moving them. But they were rushing. The recovery footage showed the 3 astronauts being pulled from the water and hustled onto the helicopter with an urgency that looked almost like panic. They were wrapped in blankets, but instead of the usual smiles and waves, they looked dazed, almost catatonic. Jim Lovell, who'd been cracking jokes just hours earlier, looked like he'd aged 10 years. Jack Swigert's face was pale, his eyes distant. Fred Hayes looked like he might be in shock. On the aircraft carrier USS Iwo Jima, instead of the usual celebrations and medical checks and calls to the president, they were surrounded by men in white contamination suits. Not the normal NASA flight surgeons in their crisp uniforms. Different people. Military medical personnel in full hazmat gear, the kind you'd use if you were worried about biological contamination. The astronauts were rushed below deck immediately. No waving to the cameras, no triumphant speeches to the assembled sailors. Just straight down into the belly of the ship, surrounded by people in protective gear. And the command module itself, the spacecraft that had brought them home, was immediately covered with a tarp and loaded onto a military transport plane. Not a NASA plane, not one of our recovery aircraft. A military transport with no identifying markings, just a tail number. Where are they taking it? I asked Leonard, who'd come in for the splashdown even though it wasn't his shift. His face was grey, his hands shaking. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Debriefing, standard procedure. That's not standard procedure, and you know it. Leonard, what the hell is going on? Why are they treating them like they're contaminated? Why the hazmat suits? He grabbed my arm and pulled me close, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper. His breath smelled stale, like he'd been living on coffee and fear. Drop it, Walter. For your own sake, for your family's sake, drop it. Those men are home safe, and that's all that matters. That's the only thing that matters. Do you understand me? No, I don't understand. I don't understand any of this. Why are they... Because they're checking them, Leonard hissed. They're checking to see if they brought anything back with them. Anything they picked up out there. Anything that might have gotten on the spacecraft or in the spacecraft or... He stopped, his face going even paler. Just drop it, Walter, please, I'm begging you. Drop it and walk away and forget everything you've seen and heard. You mean like you're going to do? He looked at me with haunted eyes. I'm trying to save your life. I'm trying to save my family. That's all I can do now. That's all any of us can do. He released my arm and walked away, leaving me standing there on the edge of the celebration, watching everyone else cheer and hug and cry tears of relief, while I felt like I'd just watched something deeply wrong unfold in front of me. That night, Leonard didn't show up for his shift. I called his house around midnight during my break. The phone rang and rang, but no one answered. I tried again at 2 a.m. Still, nothing. I imagined the phone ringing in their empty kitchen, echoing through dark rooms. Grace and the girls asleep upstairs. Leonard. Where? Where was Leonard? I tried calling Leonard's house for 3 days straight. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. The phone would ring 10, 15 times, but no one picked up. On Thursday when I called, I got a recorded message. The number you have dialed has been disconnected. No further information is available. Friday morning, before my shift, I drove past Leonard's house. It was on my way to work anyway. Just a small detour through a subdivision of modest ranch-style homes with neat lawns and station wagons in the driveways. The kind of neighborhood where kids played kickball in the street and families had backyard barbecues on weekends. There was a for sale sign in the front yard, stuck in the grass near the mailbox. Through the windows I could see the house was empty. The furniture was gone. The curtains were gone. The family pictures that had hung on the walls, visible through the living room window, were gone. Even the curtain rods were gone, leaving just bare windows staring out at the street like empty eyes. I pulled into the driveway and sat there for a moment, my heart pounding. Then I got out and walked up to the front door, my shoes leaving tracks in the dew-covered grass. I knocked, knowing no one would answer, but needing to try anyway. The sound echoed emptily inside. I tried the doorknob. Locked. I went around to the back, jumping the chain-link fence and landing in the backyard where Leonard had told me he'd built a swing set for the girls last summer. The swing set was gone too, leaving just 4 holes in the grass where the posts had been. The back door was locked too, but I could see through the kitchen window. The house wasn't just empty. It was cleaned out. No dishes in the sink. No magnets on the refrigerator. No signs that anyone had ever lived there. It looked like a model home, sanitized and sterile and devoid of any human presence. No forwarding address on the mailbox. No note explaining where they'd gone. Just gone, like they'd never existed. I stood in that empty backyard for 10 minutes, looking at the 4 holes where the swing set had been, trying to understand. How do you move an entire family's worth of belongings in less than a week? How do you disappear so completely that there's no trace you were ever there? Unless someone helps you disappear. Unless someone with resources and authority decides that you need to vanish, and they have the means to make it happen quickly and thoroughly. I drove to work in a daze, barely remembering the route. When I got to Mission Control, I went straight to our supervisor's office. Gerald Hopkins was there, reviewing some paperwork, looking even more exhausted than the last time I'd seen him. His hand shook slightly as he turned the pages. "Walter, what can I do for you?" "It's about Leonard Pritchard. He hasn't been to work in a week and his house is empty. I'm worried about him and his family. Do you know where they went?" Gerald's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Fear, maybe, or resignation. Leonard took a transfer. Last-minute thing. Opportunity came up out west and he and his family relocated over the weekend. Relocated where? That's not your concern, Walter. He was my friend. We worked together for 2 years. You'd think he'd at least say goodbye. You'd think he'd tell someone he was leaving. Sometimes opportunities come up suddenly, and you have to make quick decisions. Gerald stood up and came around his desk, putting a hand on my shoulder in what was probably meant to be a reassuring gesture, but felt more like a warning. Leonard is fine. His family is fine. They're starting a new chapter in their lives. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do, and so do you. It was a dismissal. I left his office and went to my station, but I couldn't focus on my work. Leonard was gone, vanished, and everyone was acting like this was perfectly normal, like people didn't just disappear overnight with their entire family. I thought about Grace and those 2 little girls, Emily with her pirouettes and Charlotte with her rock collection. Where were they now? Had they wanted to leave? Had Leonard told them why they had to go? Or had he just packed them up one night and driven away, leaving everything behind? Or had they been given a choice at all? The following Monday, April 27th, I was called to a meeting. Not at NASA. The message came through my supervisor, typed on a memo that gave me an address and a time. 2 p.m. No explanation. No indication of what the meeting was about. Just an address and a time, and an implicit command that I'd better be there. The address was for an office building, about 10 miles from Mission Control, in an industrial area near the ship channel. It was a low, nondescript structure, 3 stories of concrete and glass that could have housed any kind of business. There was no signage on the building, just an address number above the door. I went because I didn't know what else to do. I told Dorothy I had a meeting with some contractors about telecommunications equipment. Another lie to add to the growing pile. The interior of the building was just as nondescript as the exterior. Plain tile floors, white walls, fluorescent lights that hummed with that electrical frequency that always gave me a headache. A receptionist at a desk in the lobby asked my name, checked a list, and directed me to the 3rd floor, room 304. I took the elevator up, my stomach churning with anxiety. The hallway on the 3rd floor was empty, lined with closed doors that had no labels or nameplates. I found room 304 and knocked. "Come in." The room was a small conference room with no windows. A single table, 6 chairs, and nothing else. No pictures on the walls, no plants, no personal touches of any kind. 3 men were waiting for me, and the temperature in the room felt wrong. Too cold, like they'd turned the air conditioning up too high, or like the room itself was somehow colder than it should be. 2 of them I'd never seen before. Middle-aged men in dark suits with expressions that suggested they'd been born without the capacity for humor. Their faces were bland, forgettable. The kind of faces you'd pass on the street and not remember 5 minutes later. But their eyes were sharp, assessing, taking in every detail of my appearance and demeanor. The 3rd man I recognized, Raymond Foster, a NASA administrator I'd seen around Mission Control but never spoken to directly. He was in his late 50s, grey hair, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of bureaucrat who'd spent his career navigating the treacherous waters of government work. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept well in months. "Mr. Brennan, please sit down," Foster said, gesturing to the chair across from him. I sat. The chair was uncomfortable, designed to keep people off balance, the kind of chair you'd find in an interrogation room. One of the suited men opened a briefcase and removed a folder. He slid it across the table to me with careful precision. "Do you recognize these?" I opened the folder. Inside were transcripts of the transmissions I'd heard. My transcripts, the ones I'd written in my secret notebook. My handwriting, complete with the timestamps and frequency notations I had added. They'd gone through my things. While I was at work, or asleep, or spending time with my family, someone had searched my possessions, found my notebook, and photographed the pages. "Yes," I said, because there was no point in lying. "I recognize them." "These transmissions are classified," the man said. His voice was flat, emotionless, like he was reading from a script he'd memorized. "You were ordered not to document them." I needed to understand what I was hearing. I needed to know if there was a pattern, if they were connected to the mission. That's not your job. Your job is to monitor and report. That's all. You exceeded your authority and violated security protocols. The second suited man leaned forward. He had pale blue eyes that reminded me of chips of ice. "How many times did you listen to the recordings, Mr. Brennan?" My mouth went dry. They knew about the tape, of course they knew. They probably searched my house, gone through my basement, found the tape recorder and the cassette, hidden in the metal box behind the water heater. "Once," I lied. "Just once. I thought it might be equipment malfunction, so I wanted to verify the transmission was real." "And what did you conclude?" "That it was an equipment malfunction, that it was a genuine transmission from deep space." "Did you share this recording with anyone? Your wife, a friend, any of your colleagues besides Mr. Pritchard?" "No, no one. And I didn't share anything with Leonard either. We never discussed the transmissions outside of work. We never talked about them in detail. He warned me to be careful. That's all." The 2 men exchanged glances. Some silent communication passed between them, an entire conversation conducted in eye movements and slight changes in expression. They were evaluating me, determining whether I was telling the truth, deciding what to do with me. Finally, Foster spoke up. His voice was gentler than the other 2, almost sympathetic. "Walter, what you heard was part of a classified Cold War operation. The Soviets have been attempting to interfere with our communications for years, testing our security protocols, trying to discover our encryption methods, attempting to create confusion and paranoia among our personnel. What you heard was one of their more sophisticated attempts at psychological warfare, confusing transmissions designed to distort us, to make us second-guess ourselves, to create paranoia and uncertainty in our ranks. I stared at him. He was lying. I could see it in his eyes, in the way his hands were clasped too tightly on the table in front of him, in the slight tremor in his voice when he said psychological warfare. "That's not true," I said quietly. "Excuse me? That's not what those transmissions were. They weren't Soviet. The voices were American, old American accents from the 40s or 50s, and they were coming from deep space, from beyond the moon, not from Earth. The signal strength and directional readings confirmed that. The inverse square law calculations don't match terrestrial sources, even accounting for ionospheric bounce or satellite relay." Foster's expression hardened, his jaw clenching. "You need to listen very carefully, Mr. Brennan. What you think you know, you don't know. What you think you heard, you didn't hear. This is a matter of national security that goes far beyond your clearance level or your understanding. There are things happening that you cannot be told about, things that are classified at levels that most people don't even know exist. Do you understand?" "No," I said, my voice rising despite my intention to stay calm. "I don't understand. 3 men nearly died up there. Leonard Pritchard and his entire family have disappeared. Other people I worked with have been transferred, or relocated, or have just vanished. Douglas Webster looks like he's had a nervous breakdown. Timothy Aldrich is dead." "Mr. Aldrich's death was a tragic accident," one of the suited men interrupted. "He drowned while boating on Lake Travis. There was an investigation. It was determined to be an accident. He was an excellent swimmer. Everyone who knew him said so. And he died 6 months after hearing the transmissions. That's not coincidence. Sometimes people drown, Mr. Brennan. Even good swimmers. That's why they're called accidents." One of the suited men placed a manila envelope on the table, sliding it across to me with the same careful precision as the folder. "Inside this envelope is a transfer order. You're being moved to a new position within NASA. Better pay, better hours, better opportunities for advancement. You'll be working on telecommunications infrastructure for the upcoming Skylab project. It's a significant promotion, Mr. Brennan. Most people in your position would be grateful for such an opportunity." I looked at the envelope like it was a snake coiled and ready to strike. "And if I refuse?" "Why would you refuse a promotion?" The suited man's voice remained flat, but there was an edge to it now, a subtle threat wrapped in the reasonable-sounding question. "You have a wife and 2 young sons, a mortgage, car payments, a life that depends on your continued employment and good standing. Michael is 5 now, isn't he? Started kindergarten this year? And Stephen is 3. Such wonderful ages. You must be very proud of them." The threat was clear now, not even bothering to hide behind polite language. They knew my family. They knew my children's names, their ages. They were telling me, in the clearest possible terms, that if I didn't cooperate, my family would suffer. Accept the promotion and keep my mouth shut, or lose everything. My job, my career, maybe even my freedom, maybe even my family. If what had happened to Leonard was any indication. I looked at Raymond Foster, trying to find some sympathy, some hint that he understood how wrong this was. "Can I ask one question, just one?" He hesitated, then nodded. "One question. The transmissions I heard, were they the reason Apollo 13's mission was aborted? Was the explosion intentional? Did someone sabotage that spacecraft to prevent the astronauts from getting too close to whatever was sending those signals?" The 3 men stood up simultaneously. their movements synchronized like they'd rehearsed it, like they'd done this before with other people who'd asked too many questions. The meeting was over. "Get some rest, Mr. Brennan," Foster said, picking up his briefcase with hands that trembled slightly. "You've been under a lot of stress. The Apollo 13 rescue took a toll on all of us. Report to your new position Monday morning at 8 a.m. Your new supervisor will brief you on your responsibilities." And Mr. Brennan? This conversation never happened. These transmissions you think you heard never happened. Mr. Pritchard's transfer was routine. Mr. Aldrich's death was a tragic accident. And if you value your family's safety and well-being, you'll remember that. Am I making myself clear? "Crystal clear," I said, my voice hollow. They filed out of the room, leaving me sitting there alone with the manila envelope. I sat there for a long time, maybe 20 minutes, staring at that envelope, like it contained my death sentence. In a way, it did. Not physical death, but the death of my ability to speak truth, to seek answers, to be anything other than a compliant cog in a machine that was hiding something terrible. Finally, I picked it up and left. I took the promotion. What else could I do? I had Dorothy and Michael and Stephen depending on me. I had a mortgage and bills and responsibilities. I couldn't throw it all away because of voices in the static and suspicions I couldn't prove, and threats against my family that were implied, but no less real for being unspoken. But I didn't stop asking questions. I just learned to ask them more quietly, more carefully. I learned to be patient. I learned that if I wanted to understand what had really happened, I'd need to be smarter, more cautious, more willing to wait for opportunities rather than forcing them. Over the next year, I tried to track down the other communication specialists who'd been on duty during those crucial days in April 1970. It wasn't easy. Most of them had been transferred like me, scattered across the country to different NASA facilities, different projects. Some had left NASA entirely, taking jobs in the private sector or retiring early despite being young enough to work for another 20 years. But I was patient, and I was careful, and I knew how to find people. I used the internal directory called Old Contacts, followed leads that came through casual conversations with former colleagues. I built a network of information slowly, carefully, making sure never to seem too interested, never to ask too many direct questions. In September 1971, I tracked down a woman named Helen Cordell, who'd worked the morning shifts during the Apollo 13 mission. She'd been transferred to a NASA facility in Virginia, working on satellite communications for weather monitoring systems. I found her through the internal directory, noting that she'd been moved from Houston to Wallops Island less than 3 weeks after Apollo 13 splashed down. Unusual timing for a transfer, especially one across the country. I didn't call her directly. That seemed too risky, too obvious. Instead, I sent her a letter, carefully worded, using my personal address rather than my work address. "Dear Mrs. Cordell, my name is Walter Brennan. We both worked at Mission Control during April 1970. I'm planning to be in the Virginia area next month for some personal business, and I wondered if you might be willing to meet for coffee. I'd enjoy talking with someone who shares similar professional experiences. Please let me know if you're interested. Sincerely, Walter Brennan." Vague enough to seem innocent if anyone intercepted it. Specific enough that she'd understand what I was really asking. The mention of April 1970 would tell her everything she needed to know. 2 weeks later, I got a phone call at home. It was a Tuesday night, around 9 p.m. Dorothy answered, then handed me the phone with a puzzled expression. "It's for you, a woman." She wouldn't give her name. I took the phone, my heart already racing, and walked as far away from Dorothy as the cord would allow, lowering my voice. "Hello? Don't write to me again." Helen Cordell's voice was tight with fear, barely above a whisper, like she was afraid someone might be listening. Don't call. Don't try to find me. Do you understand?" "I just want to talk," I said, cupping my hand around the mouthpiece and turning away from Dorothy, who was pretending to read a magazine but was clearly listening. "About what we heard, about what happened." "There's nothing to talk about. Nothing happened. We did our jobs and we moved on. That's all. That's the only story there is." "Helen, please. I need to know I'm not crazy. I need to know someone else heard what I heard. I need to know someone else understands what we encountered out there. I'm not trying to cause problems. I just need to know the truth." There was a long silence on the line. I could hear her breathing, fast and shallow, like she was frightened or trying not to cry. In the background, I thought I heard traffic, like she was calling from a payphone rather than her home. Finally, "There's a shopping mall in Richmond, Valley Park Mall, food court on the second level, this Saturday at 2 p.m. If you're there, I'll find you. If you're not there, we never had this conversation. And Walter, come alone. Don't tell anyone where you're going or who you're meeting. Not your wife, not your friends, not anyone at NASA. This conversation never happened. Do you understand?" The line went dead before I could respond, leaving me standing there with the phone pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone. I told Dorothy I was going to Richmond for work, a consultation on some telecommunications equipment for a tracking station. Another lie, but what was one more at this point? I'd been lying to her for over a year, hiding notebooks and tape recordings and the growing list of names of people who died or disappeared. One more lie seemed insignificant compared to the mountain of deception I was already living with. I drove 7 hours on Friday listening to the radio to keep myself awake, stopping at a diner for bad coffee and a sandwich that tasted like cardboard. I got a cheap motel room near the interstate, the kind of place where you paid cash and nobody asked questions. The room smelled like cigarettes and old carpet, and the mattress sagged in the middle. But I barely slept anyway. I kept thinking about Helen's voice, how frightened she'd sounded, and wondering what I was walking into. Saturday morning, I drove to the Valley Park Mall, arriving at 1:45 p.m. The mall was crowded with weekend shoppers, families with children, teenagers in groups, elderly couples walking slowly through the corridors for exercise. The normalcy of it all felt surreal after everything I'd been through. These people were shopping for clothes and appliances and gifts, completely unaware that there were secrets being kept, horrors being hidden, people disappearing because they'd asked the wrong questions. I went up to the second level and found the food court, a large open space with dozens of tables and chairs surrounding a collection of fast food restaurants. The smell of hamburgers and French fries and pizza filled the air, mixing with the sound of conversations and children's laughter and the tinny music playing over the mall's speaker system. I bought a coffee and found a table near the back, positioned where I could watch the entrances. I waited, watching the crowd, looking for a woman I'd only seen briefly in passing at Mission Control, trying to remember what she looked like. I had a vague memory of someone small, dark-haired, quiet, but that described half the women who worked at NASA. Helen Cordell found me at 2:05 p.m. She was a small woman, maybe 5 feet tall, in her late 30s or early 40s, with short dark hair cut in a practical style and eyes that never stopped moving, constantly scanning the crowd like she was expecting someone to jump out at her. She wore jeans and a plain blue sweater, deliberately unremarkable, the kind of outfit designed to help you disappear into a crowd. She sat down across from me but kept her distance, her purse in her lap, her car keys in her hand like she was ready to bolt at any second. "You have 10 minutes, she said without preamble, without even a greeting. "Then I'm leaving, and we never see each other again. We never had this conversation. You never sent me that letter. Understood?" "Did you hear the transmissions? The voices on the encrypted channels?" "Yes." Her hands were shaking slightly. She noticed me looking, and clenched them into fists, pressing them against her thighs. I heard them. Do you still hear them? Her face went pale, all the colour draining from her cheeks in an instant. What do you mean? Sometimes late at night, when everything is quiet, I hear them in my head. Not on any radio or recording, just there, like an echo that won't fade. Like they've gotten inside my head somehow, and I can't get them out no matter what I do. Helen's breath caught, and for a moment I thought she might start crying or screaming, or just run away. Yes, she whispered. I thought I was going insane. I thought the stress of the rescue had broken something in my brain. I thought I was having a nervous breakdown or developing schizophrenia or something. I've seen 3 different psychiatrists, and they all tell me it's just stress, just PTSD from a traumatic event. But I know what I heard was real, and I know it hasn't stopped. What did your voices say? Were they the same as mine? Different things. Mine said, the navigation was wrong, we've been here before. Metal forest underground. And another time, 3 degrees off the mark. Turn back before it sees you. There were others, but I don't remember them all. I tried to forget. I tried so hard to forget. But they keep coming back, especially when I'm trying to sleep. I hear them whispering in the darkness, and I don't know if they're real transmissions still happening, or if they're just memories trapped in my brain. Where were they coming from? Did you get any indication of the source? Helen glanced around the food court, checking to make sure no one was paying attention to us. A family at a nearby table was arguing about which movie to see. A group of teenagers was laughing about something. Everyone was absorbed in their own lives, their own concerns. My supervisor told me, before they transferred him to God knows where, that the transmissions were coming from the direction of the moon, but not from the lunar surface, from beyond it, from somewhere in the space between the moon and the asteroid belt, maybe farther. The calculations weren't precise because we didn't have enough time to do proper triangulation before they shut everything down. That's impossible. There's nothing out there. No satellites, no spacecraft, nothing human that could generate those transmissions. That's what makes it so terrifying, Walter. She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping even lower, forced to speak over the ambient noise of the food court. There shouldn't be anything out there, but there was. There is. Something that can broadcast on our frequencies. Something that can speak in English with American accents from decades ago. Something that knows things it shouldn't know. Something that tried to warn us and we chose not to listen. A mall security guard walked past our table, and Helen tensed like she was about to run. Her entire body went rigid, and I saw her hand tighten around her car keys, ready to use them as a weapon if necessary. She tracked his movement with her eyes, not relaxing until he'd walked completely out of sight. I'm being watched, she said quietly. I know I am. There's a car that parks across from my apartment sometimes, different cars, but always someone sitting in them, watching my building. My phone makes clicking sounds when I'm on calls. Mail arrives, opened, and then resealed. They're not even trying to hide it anymore. They want me to know I'm being watched, want me to understand that they can get to me whenever they want. Jesus, Helen. Apollo 13 wasn't the first mission to hear them, she continued, the words spilling out now like she'd been holding them in for too long and couldn't contain them anymore. Apollo 11 heard something, maybe Apollo 12 too. I don't know for sure, but my supervisor hinted at it before they made him disappear. He said there were incidents, anomalies that never made it into the public reports or even the internal documentation. Strange readings that would appear and then be erased from the logs before anyone could study them. Unusual transmissions that would be classified above top secret, sealed in ways that even people with top secret clearance couldn't access them. Moments where the astronauts would go silent for a few seconds, and when they came back online, they'd refuse to discuss what they'd seen or heard. And if you pressed them, if you asked too many questions, you'd find yourself transferred or demoted or simply disappeared. I felt my stomach drop. So what was Apollo 13 really supposed to do? What was their real mission? I don't know for certain. Nobody tells the people on my level anything real. But maybe they were supposed to investigate. Maybe verify what Apollo 11 and 12 had encountered. Or maybe... She stopped, struggling with the words, her fingers twisting the keys in her hand so hard I thought she might snap them. Maybe they were supposed to make contact with whatever was sending those signals. Maybe someone high up the chain of command decided we needed to know what was out there, needed to understand what we were dealing with. And when the explosion happened, when the transmissions started coming through more frequently and more clearly, it gave them an excuse to abort the mission and bring the astronauts home before they got too close to whatever is out there, before they saw something that couldn't be explained away, or classified, or forgotten. You think the explosion was intentional? You think someone sabotaged Apollo 13? I don't know what I think anymore. All I know is that 17 people who worked on Apollo 13, who heard those transmissions or worked in areas where they might have had access to classified information about them, have died in the last 18 months. Car accidents, suicides, sudden illnesses, heart attacks in people too young and too healthy to have heart attacks. One woman, Patricia Hammond, fell down her basement stairs and broke her neck. She was 34 years old, in perfect health, athletic. Another man, Roger Chen, died in a house fire that started in his locked study where he kept his personal papers. The fire marshal said it was probably an electrical short, but Roger was an electrical engineer. He would have known better than to have faulty wiring in his study. 17? That I know of for certain. There could be more. There probably are more. I keep a list, updating it when I hear about deaths through the grapevine, or read obituaries in industry newsletters. Every few months, another name gets added. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her purse, her movements quick and furtive like she was afraid someone might see. She unfolded it and slid it across the table. I made you a copy. Keep it somewhere safe. Hide it where they won't find it, and if anything happens to me, if I have an accident or just disappear, someone should know. Someone should have evidence of what's happening. I unfolded the paper with trembling hands. 17 names, each with a date and cause of death, typed in small, precise letters. Douglas Webster, car accident, June 12th, 1970. Single vehicle collision, drove off a bridge into a ravine. Catherine Mills, suicide, August 3rd, 1970. Overdose of sleeping pills, note left but contents never disclosed. Timothy Aldrich, drowning, November 27th, 1970. Boating accident on Lake Travis, despite being an excellent swimmer. Gerald Hopkins, heart attack January 14th, 1971. Age 43, no prior history of heart disease. Raymond Foster, heart attack March 8th, 1971. Age 57, died at his desk at work. Patricia Hammond, accidental fall, April 22nd, 1971. Fell down basement stairs, broken neck. Roger Chen, house fire, May 30th, 1971. Died of smoke inhalation. Fire originated in locked study. The list went on. I recognized most of the names. People I'd worked with, talked to in the cafeteria, passed in the hallways. Now dead. All of them dead in the span of 18 months. All under circumstances that could be explained as accidents or natural causes, but which, taken together, formed a pattern too disturbing to be coincidental. The odds of this being coincidence? I started, my voice shaking as I read through the names. Are astronomically low, Helen finished. I know. I ran the calculations using statistical analysis methods. For 17 people from a specific work group, all under 50 years old, to die in 18 months, all under circumstances that could be explained as accidents or natural causes. The probability is less than 1 in 10 million. Less than 1 in 100 million if you account for the specific types of deaths. Someone is cleaning that house, Walter. Someone is making sure that everyone who heard those transmissions, everyone who might talk, everyone who might ask the wrong questions or remember too much or piece together what really happened, disappears. Why not just kill us immediately? Why wait? Because immediate deaths would be too obvious, too suspicious. 17 people dying in car crashes or murders within a week of Apollo 13. That would trigger investigations, congressional hearings, media attention, conspiracy theories that people might actually believe, but spread out over months and years, using different methods, different apparent causes, varying the locations and circumstances. It just looks like bad luck. Tragic, but explainable. Nobody connects the dots because the dots are spread out over time and space and different types of deaths. Nobody sees the pattern unless they're specifically looking for it. I stared at the list, my hands trembling so badly the paper rattled. Helen, what do we do? We can't just sit here and wait to die. We can't just accept this. She stood up abruptly, slinging her purse over her shoulder with jerky, frightened movements. Yes, we can. That's exactly what we do. We forget what we heard. We keep our heads down. We try to live long enough to see our children grow up. If we have them, or just to live a few more years, decades, if we're very lucky and very careful. That's all that matters now. That's all we can do. Survive, keep quiet. Don't make waves. Don't investigate, don't ask questions, just survive. But whatever is out there, whatever is sending those signals, is not our problem anymore, Helen interrupted, her voice sharp and brittle, like glass about to shatter. They've made sure of that. They've transferred us, isolated us, put us in positions where we have no access to relevant information and no authority to investigate. We're neutered, Walter. Harmless. Irrelevant. As long as we stay that way, as long as we keep our mouths shut and don't cause problems, maybe they'll let us live. Maybe we'll be allowed to die of old age in our beds instead of in car accidents or house fires. Maybe. That's the best we can hope for now. Maybe. Maybe if we're very good and very quiet and very forgettable, they'll decide we're not worth the trouble of killing. That's the game we're playing now. How to be insignificant enough that killing us seems unnecessary. She started to walk away, then turned back, her face pale and drawn, her eyes red-rimmed, like she hadn't slept well in months. One more thing. They're still up there. Whatever is broadcasting those signals, whatever the astronauts almost found, it's still up there. And eventually we're going to go back. When we do, when we send more people to the moon and beyond, when we build bases and start mining operations and push farther into space. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. The implication was clear. Whatever we'd encountered was patient, and it was waiting. I watched her walk away, disappearing into the crowd of shoppers, weaving between families and teenagers until I couldn't see her anymore. I sat there for another 20 minutes, staring at the list of names, memorizing them. Then I folded the paper carefully and put it in my wallet, where it has remained for the last 53 years, slowly yellowing and wearing thin from being unfolded and read and refolded countless times. I drove back to Houston that night, the highway stretching endlessly in front of me, my headlights cutting through the darkness. I thought about those 17 people, wondered if they'd known they were in danger, wondered if they'd seen it coming or if death had surprised them. Had Douglas Webster known, in the seconds before his car went off that bridge, that it wasn't an accident? Had Catherine Mills really wanted to die, or had someone helped her along? Had Timothy Aldridge struggled as he drowned, wondering why his limbs wouldn't work properly? Why the water that should have been his natural element was dragging him down? I thought about Leonard Pritchard and his family, disappeared into the night like they'd never existed. Were they still alive somewhere, living under new names, constantly looking over their shoulders? Or were they buried in unmarked graves somewhere, Another loose end tied off, another problem solved. I never tried to contact Helen Cordell again. Every few months I'd check the internal newsletters and directories, looking for her name, making sure she was still alive. For 2 years, her name appeared regularly in the Wallops Island facility reports, listed as working on various satellite communication projects. Then, in November 1973, her name disappeared from the newsletters. 2 weeks later, I saw a small obituary in the industry newsletter that NASA circulated internally. Helen Cordell, 42, found dead in her apartment from carbon monoxide poisoning. The article said she'd been found by her landlord after neighbours reported a strange smell. The police ruled it an accident, said her furnace had malfunctioned, pumping deadly gas into her small apartment while she slept. There was no indication she'd suffered, the article assured readers. She'd simply gone to sleep and never woken up. I added her name to the list. 18. Over the next 3 years, the list grew. A former tracking station operator in Australia. Car accident. A computer specialist who'd helped with orbit calculations. Sudden brain aneurysm. A NASA administrator who'd been present during the classified meetings. Heart attack at age 46. Each death was explainable on its own. Tragic, but not suspicious. Accidents happen. People die. But taken together, the pattern was undeniable. And the pattern was still growing. I stayed at NASA until 1974. But my heart wasn't in it anymore. Every launch, every mission, every time I saw the moon in the sky, I'd wonder what we were really doing up there, what we were looking for, what we were running from, what we'd left unanswered in the darkness between worlds. The work I was doing on Skylab Telecommunications was interesting enough, technically challenging, but it felt hollow. I was helping build infrastructure for a space station while knowing that we'd encountered something inexplicable during Apollo 13 and chosen to bury it rather than investigate it. How could I take pride in that? How could I feel like I was advancing human knowledge when I knew we were deliberately ignoring the most profound discovery in human history? Dorothy knew something was wrong. She'd find me standing in the backyard late at night, staring up at the moon through the bare branches of our oak tree, and she'd come out in her robe and slippers and ask me what I was thinking about. I'd tell her I was just appreciating the view, admiring the beauty of the night sky, marveling at the fact that humans had actually walked up there. But we both knew it was a lie. The distance between us grew, not because we loved each other less, but because I was carrying secrets that were crushing me from the inside out. Secrets I couldn't share even with the person I loved most in the world. We'd lie in bed at night, inches apart but feeling like miles, and I'd want to tell her everything, want to unburden myself, to share the weight of what I knew. But I'd think about those 17 names, now 18, and I'd think about Michael and Stephen sleeping in their rooms down the hall. And I'd keep my mouth shut, because telling her would put her at risk. If they decided she knew too much, they might decide she needed to be silenced too. Better to carry the burden alone than to endanger my family. I started drinking. Not heavily, not like an alcoholic, but enough. A whiskey before bed, sometimes two. Enough to quiet the voices I still heard sometimes in the dead of night, whispering those same fragmented warnings. Enough to stop my brain from running through scenarios, from trying to puzzle out what was really happening, from imagining all the ways I might die if I made one wrong move. Enough to let me sleep without dreaming of vast dark spaces and things that shouldn't exist. Dorothy worried. She'd ask if everything was okay at work, if I was happy with my promotion, if I wanted to talk to someone, a doctor, a counsellor, someone who could help me with whatever was bothering me. I'd reassure her that everything was fine, that I was just tired, that the job was stressful but rewarding, that the drinking was just a way to unwind after long days. More lies. Always more lies. The boys were getting older, needing their father's attention. Michael was struggling with math, needed help with his homework. Stephen had joined Little League, needed someone to play catch with him in the backyard, someone to come to his games and cheer him on. I tried to be present for them, tried to be the father they deserved, but part of me was always somewhere else. Part of me was always watching the moon, wondering what it was watching back, wondering if whatever was out there could see us, could see into our lives and our homes and our thoughts. In July 1974, I resigned from NASA. I told them it was for personal reasons, family considerations, a desire to spend more time at home with my growing boys. They accepted my resignation without question, processed the paperwork within a week, which should have been a relief but somehow felt ominous, like they were glad to be rid of me, like I'd outlived my usefulness, and they were happy to let me walk away, content that I'd been sufficiently intimidated and isolated. I got a job with a private telecommunications company, boring work with normal hours and no secrets, installing phone systems for businesses, troubleshooting interference issues, designing communication networks for office buildings and factories. It was mind-numbing after the excitement of NASA, but it was safe, normal. I could go to work, do my job, come home, and not worry about mysterious transmissions or disappearing colleagues or government conspiracies or being the 18th name added to a list of suspicious deaths. Dorothy was relieved. The tension that had been building in our marriage eased somewhat. The boys were happy to have me around more. I'd be there when they got home from school, could help with homework, could drive them to their activities. We fell into a comfortable routine. Soccer games on Saturdays, church on Sundays, family dinners every night where we'd sit around the table and talk about our days like normal people living normal lives. We were healing, slowly rebuilding what my paranoia and fear had damaged. Dorothy started smiling more. The boys stopped asking if I was okay all the time. I cut back on the drinking, not stopping entirely, but reducing it to an occasional glass of wine, with dinner or a beer while watching TV. But the moon was always there, watching, and I was always watching back. Over the years, I kept my scrapbook, newspaper clippings about the space program, articles about future missions to the moon and Mars, obituaries of former NASA employees who died too young under circumstances that seemed suspicious if you were looking for patterns. I kept it hidden in the back of my closet, behind boxes of old tax returns and Christmas decorations, in a cardboard box labelled old work files that Dorothy had no reason to open, and I kept the list. Helen's list, updated with new names as I heard about them through the grapevine, through chance encounters with former colleagues at industry conferences or holiday parties, through obituaries in newsletters and local newspapers that I'd started collecting obsessively. The list grew steadily, relentlessly, like a slow-motion massacre spread out over decades. 23 names by 1985, 27 by 1990, 32 by 2000, 37 by 2010. Not all of them had heard the transmissions directly. Some were administrators who would have had access to reports about them. Some were engineers who worked on the tracking systems that pinpointed the source of the signals. Some were technicians who maintained the encryption equipment. Some were flight surgeons who examined the astronauts after splashdown. But all of them had been connected somehow to what happened in April 1970. All of them had been part of the conspiracy of silence, whether willingly or unwillingly, and all of them were dead. I attended a few of the funerals over the years when they were local, and I had a plausible excuse to be there. Stood in the back, paid my respects, watched grieving families say goodbye to loved ones who died too soon. I never introduced myself to the families, never explained my connection. I just watched and remembered and added their names to my list. At one funeral in 1983, I ran into another former NASA employee, a man named Bernard Fleming, who'd worked in mission planning. We recognized each other, exchanged awkward pleasantries, talked about the deceased. Then, as people were leaving, Bernard pulled me aside. "Do you ever wonder?" he asked quietly. "Wonder about what? About how many of us are left? How many people who worked Apollo 13 are still alive? I've been keeping track informally. It's not a lot, Walter. It's not a lot at all." "Maybe we're just getting old," I said, though I didn't believe it. "People our age die sometimes." "Not like this, not in these numbers, not with these kinds of patterns." He looked around to make sure no one was listening, then said, "I heard the transmissions too. Different ones than you probably heard, different shifts, but I heard them, and I was told to forget them. We all were." "Did you forget them?" He laughed, a bitter sound. "No, you don't forget something like that. You learn to live with it, learn to act like you've forgotten, but you never really do. I still hear them sometimes, Walter. In my dreams. Do you?" I nodded. "Yes." "We're the last ones," Bernard said, "or close to it. Most of the others are gone, and eventually they'll come for us too. Maybe not this year, maybe not for another decade, but they will. They're patient, they're thorough, and they don't leave loose ends. Then why are we still alive? Maybe they've decided we're harmless. Maybe they're monitoring us and have concluded we're not going to talk, not going to cause problems. Or maybe we're just low on their list, and they haven't gotten around to us yet." He clapped me on the shoulder. "Be careful, Walter. Watch your back. And if anything happens to me, if I have an accident, or just disappear, remember this conversation." 3 months later, Bernard Fleming died in his sleep. Heart attack, the obituary said. Age 58, no prior history of heart disease. He'd gone to bed one night and simply never woken up. His wife found him in the morning, cold and stiff, already gone for hours. I added his name to the list. 33. Dorothy died in 1998. Breast cancer that metastasized to her bones and liver before we caught it, spreading with horrifying speed through her body, like fire through dry brush. By the time we got the diagnosis, it was already stage 4, already terminal. The doctors gave her 6 months. She lasted 8, fighting every day, refusing to give up even when the pain became unbearable, and the treatments made her violently ill. Michael and Stephen were there, my sons now grown men with families of their own. Michael had become a high school teacher, married to a woman named Jennifer with 3 kids. Stephen was an accountant, married to Rebecca with 2 kids. They'd visit the hospital every day, bringing their children, Dorothy's grandchildren, to cheer her up. I watched her fade, watched the cancer consume her from the inside out, and I felt helpless. All my knowledge, all my technical expertise, all my understanding of complex systems, and I couldn't save the woman I loved. Couldn't even ease her pain beyond what the morphine drips could provide. She died on a Tuesday in November, the sky outside her hospital window grey and overcast, threatening rain. I held her hand as she slipped away, and her last words to me were, "Stop worrying so much, Walter. Everything is going to be okay." But she was wrong. Everything wasn't going to be okay. Everything hadn't been okay since April 1970, and it never would be again. After her funeral, after the reception, after everyone had gone home and I was alone in the house we'd shared for 33 years, I went down to the basement. In the far corner, behind boxes of Christmas decorations and old furniture Dorothy had insisted on keeping, just in case, behind the water heater and a stack of paint cans from projects completed decades ago, was the spot where I'd buried the tape recorder and the cassette with the transmission from April 13th, 1970. I'd buried it in 1971, wrapped in plastic bags, inside a metal cash box I'd bought at a hardware store, sealing it against moisture and decay. I'd waited until Dorothy was out shopping with the boys, had dug a hole in the dirt floor of our basement's crawl space, and buried the evidence of what I'd heard. Then I'd covered it back up, pushed an old cabinet over the spot and tried to forget about it. Now I moved the cabinet, got a shovel from the garage, and dug. My hands weren't as strong as they used to be, my back protesting with every shovelful of dirt, but I kept digging until I hit metal. The cash box was still there, rusted but intact. I brushed off the dirt and carried it up to my workshop, my heart pounding. Inside, wrapped in plastic that had yellowed with age and become brittle, was the tape recorder and the cassette. I sat there on my workbench, an old man with dirt under his fingernails and tears on my face, and I held that tape in my hands for a long time. I didn't listen to it. I couldn't. I was afraid that after all these years the tape would have degraded, the magnetic information lost or corrupted. Or worse, I was afraid it would still work, and I'd have to hear those voices again, clear and close, and confront the reality that I'd spent 27 years trying to forget. I just wanted to know it was still there, that I hadn't imagined the whole thing, that the last 28 years of fear and paranoia and watching over my shoulder had been based on something real. I rewrapped it carefully in fresh plastic bags, put it back in the cash box and reburied it, covered it back up and moved the cabinet back into place, brushed the dirt off my clothes. Then I went upstairs and poured myself 3 fingers of whiskey and sat in the dark living room staring at the spot where Dorothy used to sit when she'd knit or read or watch television. The house felt empty without her. Not just physically empty, but empty in a deeper way, like something essential had been removed and could never be replaced. For 33 years she'd been the centre of my world, the anchor that kept me grounded when paranoia threatened to consume me. Now she was gone, and I was adrift. My sons think I'm losing my mind. Michael and Stephen, both middle-aged now with families of their own, successful careers, normal lives. They see me watching the news reports about new moon missions, about plans for permanent lunar bases and mining operations and eventual missions to Mars, and they think it's just old age nostalgia from my glory days at NASA, an old man reliving his past. They don't understand. They can't understand. I've never told them about the transmissions, about the list of names, about the friends and colleagues who died suspiciously over the decades. How could I? They'd think I was paranoid, delusional, suffering from dementia or some other age-related cognitive decline. Michael came to visit last week, Wednesday afternoon, showing up unannounced with a casserole from Jennifer and concern in his eyes. We sat in the living room making awkward small talk about his kids and his job and the weather, dancing around the real reason for his visit. Finally, he said, "Dad, I'm worried about you living alone. This house is too big for one person. Have you thought about moving somewhere smaller? Maybe an assisted living facility? Somewhere with other people, activities, someone to check on you?" "I'm fine here," I said. "This is my home. Your mother and I built a life here." "I know, but..." He trailed off, then pulled something from his bag. My scrapbook, the one I kept in the back of my closet. I was looking for Mum's old recipe books, and I found this. "Dad, why do you have all these articles about people dying? It's morbid. It's not healthy to dwell on death like this." I looked at the scrapbook, at the yellowed newspaper clippings and obituaries carefully pasted to the pages, at my handwritten notes in the margins. 37 names now, each with their date of death and a brief note about the circumstances. I was just keeping track of old colleagues, I said, the lie coming easily after decades of practice, paying respects to people I worked with. When you get to be my age, you go to a lot of funerals. It's just how things are. But some of these people you've written notes like suspicious timing or convenient accident. "Dad, that's not normal. That's..." He didn't finish the sentence, but I could see what he was thinking. "That's paranoid. That's delusional. That's the behavior of someone who needs help." "I know how it looks," I said. "But Michael, sometimes patterns emerge that make you wonder. Coincidences that don't feel like coincidences. What kind of patterns? I almost told him. The words were right there, ready to spill out. About Apollo 13, about the transmissions, about the systematic elimination of everyone who'd heard them. But I looked at him sitting there, my son, worried about his aging father, and I realized that telling him would accomplish nothing except to make him worry more. He wouldn't believe me. Why would he? It sounds insane. And even if he did believe me, what could he do? Nothing except put himself in danger. So I said, just patterns you notice when you've lived as long as I have. Forget about it. I'll put the scrapbook away. You're right, it is morbid. He didn't believe me, I could tell. But he didn't push it either. He just suggested, gently, that maybe I should talk to someone. A therapist, a counsellor, someone who specialises in elderly patients, dealing with grief and isolation and the challenges of aging alone. I agreed to think about it just to make him stop worrying, knowing I never would. What would I say to a therapist? That I've been carrying a secret for 54 years? That I believe NASA covered up something that happened during Apollo 13? That I still hear voices from space in my head sometimes? They'd put me on medication, declare me incompetent, maybe even commit me. Michael and Stephen would have me evaluated, would take control of my affairs for my own good, and I'd spend my remaining time in some facility, medicated into compliance. Besides, I don't have much time left anyway. The doctors give me 6 months, maybe 8 if I'm lucky, and the treatment works. But I don't want the treatment. I don't want to spend my last days sick from chemotherapy, losing what little hair I have left, too weak to get out of bed, vomiting into a basin while nurses watch with professional sympathy. I've had a long life, a good life despite everything. 83 years. A loving wife for 33 of those years. 2 sons who turned out well, became good men, good fathers. 5 grandchildren who are healthy and happy. A career that, despite everything, contributed something meaningful to human knowledge and exploration. I'm ready for it to end. I'm tired. Tired of carrying this burden. Tired of watching the moon and wondering. Tired of updating my list. Tired of living with fear and paranoia and secrets that I can never share. But before it ends, I need to tell this story. I need someone to know what really happened. Someone needs to have this information, even if they don't believe it, even if they think it's the ravings of a dying old man whose mind is gone. We're going back to the moon. Not tomorrow, not next year, but soon. Within the next decade, probably sooner. I see the news reports, the press releases from NASA and SpaceX and Blue Origin and a dozen other companies, both government and private. Everyone wants to go back, to establish permanent bases, to mine resources, to use the moon as a stepping stone to Mars and beyond. They're talking about it like it's a frontier to be conquered, a resource to be exploited, humanity's next great adventure. Gateway stations and mining operations and hotels and colonies. They're planning to send dozens of people, hundreds eventually, to live and work on the moon permanently. They don't know what's waiting for them. They don't understand that we left something unanswered up there 54 years ago. Something that terrified the most powerful people in our government, so badly that they've spent 5 decades covering it up, silencing witnesses and pretending it never happened. Or maybe they do know. Maybe that's why they're really going back. Maybe what happened with Apollo 13 wasn't the end of the story, but just the prologue. Maybe enough time has passed, enough witnesses have died, enough institutional memory has faded, that they feel safe trying again. Maybe they've decided that whatever risk those transmissions represented is worth taking now, that the potential rewards outweigh the dangers. Or maybe, and this is the thought that keeps me awake at night, maybe they don't have a choice. Maybe whatever is out there has been patient, has been waiting, but won't wait forever. Maybe the door that the voices talked about is closing, and if we don't go back soon, it will close completely, and we'll have missed our chance to understand what we encountered. I won't live to see it. The cancer will take me long before the first new footprints appear in the lunar dust. But sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, and the pain medication isn't working, and my body is reminding me that it's winding down, I look out my bedroom window at that pale sphere hanging in the darkness, and I wonder what's looking back. I wonder if it's still there. Whatever it is, still broadcasting those fragmented transmissions into the void, hoping someone will listen, hoping someone will understand, still counting backward towards some unknown 0 point. I wonder if it's alone, or if there are others like it scattered through the solar system, ancient things that predate humanity by millions of years, that watched the dinosaurs and the ice ages and the rise of civilization with something like curiosity or amusement or patient hunger. I wonder what the voices meant when they said, "Father brought something back." Did one of the Apollo missions bring something home? Is it here on Earth right now, hidden away in some secret facility like Area 51, or someplace even more classified that the public doesn't know exists? Or did they manage to jettison it before re-entry, sending whatever it was tumbling into the ocean where it sank to the bottom, buried in the deep places where humans rarely venture, in trenches where the pressure would crush a submarine? I wonder what the door is and why it's closing, and what happens when it finally shuts completely. Is it a metaphor for something? A window of opportunity? Or is it something more literal, more physical, something that exists in space or time or some dimension we can't perceive? I wonder if the metal forest underground is something on the moon, below its surface in caverns and tunnels that we've never seen, or if it's somewhere else, or if it's a metaphor for something the human mind can't properly comprehend, translated into the nearest equivalent concepts by whatever intelligence was trying to communicate. Mostly, though, I wonder if we're ready for the answers to these questions. If humanity is prepared to discover that we're not alone in the solar system, that there are intelligences vastly older and stranger than us, sharing our cosmic neighborhood, that the universe is far more complex and terrifying than our neat scientific models suggest. I don't think we are. I don't think we ever will be. We're children playing with fire, reaching out into the darkness without understanding what might reach back. But we're going back anyway, because that's what humans do. We push forward, we explore, we refuse to let fear or caution slow us down. It's our greatest strength and our greatest weakness. The same impulse that got us down from the trees and across the oceans and to the moon is the same impulse that might destroy us. Last night I had a dream. The most vivid dream I've had in years, more real than reality in that way that dreams sometimes are. I was back in mission control, young again, sitting at my station with my headphones on. But it wasn't the mission control I remembered. The room was dark and empty, except for me. No other operators, no supervisors, no engineers, no flight directors. Just me and my equipment and the vast emptiness of space on the other end of the signal. The equipment was different too, somehow. The dials and switches glowed with a pale blue light that I didn't remember, and the oscilloscope screens showed waveforms that didn't make sense, that violated everything I knew about signal propagation and frequency analysis. I heard the transmission again, exactly as it had sounded 54 years ago, but clearer now, more focused, those overlapping voices speaking in perfect synchronization. Tell them to turn back, tell them not to look, tell them we're sorry. We're so sorry it hurts to remember, but we have to remember, counting backwards 7, 6, 5, 4, 3. And then something new, something I'd never heard before. Not in 1970, and not in any of the times the voices have echoed through my memory over the decades. The door is closing. The door is almost closed. When it closes, we'll be gone. But what we left behind will remain. Tell them to turn back. Please, God, tell them to turn back before it's too late. Before they wake it, before they feed it, before they become like us. In the dream, I stood up and looked around the empty mission control, and I realized the darkness beyond the windows wasn't the normal darkness of night. It was something else, something deeper and more absolute, and in that darkness, something was moving, something vast and patient and hungry. I woke up gasping, my heart racing, my sheets soaked with sweat despite the cool temperature of my bedroom. It took me several minutes to remember where I was, to orient myself in the present. I'm an old man dying in his bedroom, not a young engineer at mission control. That was a dream, just a dream. But it felt real. More real than any dream has a right to feel. And those words, before they wake it, echoed in my mind with the weight of prophecy. I got out of bed, which took effort given my condition and the pain that's become my constant companion, and I went to the window. The moon was there, exactly where it's always been, hanging in the pre-dawn sky like a pearl on black velvet, beautiful, serene, eternal. And I thought, we're going back. We're going to ignore the warnings, disregard the fear, dismiss the deaths and the cover-ups, and the impossible transmissions, and we're going back. Because we don't know any better. Because the people who do know are almost all dead, and the few survivors left, people like me, are old and powerless, and no one would believe us if we tried to tell them the truth. Maybe that's for the best. Maybe humanity needs to face whatever is waiting up there. Maybe we need to open that door, even if we're not ready for what's on the other side. Maybe that's the only way we'll learn, the only way we'll grow, the only way we'll truly understand our place in the universe. Or maybe we're walking into a trap that was set 50 years ago, baited with curiosity and ambition, and the human inability to leave mysteries unsolved. Maybe by the time we realize our mistake, it will be too late to turn back, too late to close the door we've opened, too late to undo what we've set in motion. I'm telling this story now because I'm dying, and because I can't take this knowledge to my grave. Someone needs to know. Someone needs to understand that what they told us about Apollo 13 was a cover story, a convenient narrative about a heroic failure and a successful rescue that became a symbol of American ingenuity and determination. The truth is that we left something unanswered up there, hanging in the dark between the Earth and the Moon and beyond. A question we were too afraid to ask. A mystery we decided to walk away from. An intelligence that tried to communicate with us, that tried to warn us, and that we silenced through classification and denial, and the systematic elimination of anyone who might tell the real story. Apollo 13 was called a successful failure. They brought the astronauts home and everyone cheered. The media celebrated NASA's ingenuity and the crew's courage. The mission became a movie, a story of triumph over adversity, a feel-good tale of American heroism. Houston, we have a problem became a catchphrase, a cultural reference point, a symbol of staying calm under pressure. But success would have been telling the truth. Success would have been admitting that we encountered something we didn't understand, something that terrified us so badly that we've spent 50 years pretending it never happened. Success would have been having the courage to say, there's something out there. We don't know what it is. It tried to communicate with us. It tried to warn us. We need to be careful. We need to understand before we go back. Instead, we chose silence. We chose denial. We chose to bury the evidence and eliminate the witnesses and move forward as if nothing had happened. We chose convenience and comfort over truth and understanding. And now we're going back armed with our ignorance and our arrogance and our absolute certainty that we're the masters of our destiny and nothing can stop us, and I have this terrible feeling that we're going to regret it. I still hear them sometimes, the voices from that transmission, not on any radio, not on any recording, just in my head during the quiet hours before dawn, when the world is still and dark, and I'm alone with my memories and my fears and my regrets. They're always saying the same thing over and over. A warning that we refuse to heed. Tell them to turn back, tell them not to look, tell them we're sorry, we're so sorry. But sorry for what? Sorry for going where we shouldn't have gone. Sorry for seeing what we shouldn't have seen. Sorry for touching what we shouldn't have touched. Sorry for the door we opened that we can't close again. Or sorry for what's coming, for what we inadvertently set in motion when we reached out into the cosmos and touched something that should have remained untouched. I don't know. I'll probably never know. I'll be dead before any of these questions get answered, buried next to Dorothy in the cemetery, on the east side of town, my secrets buried with me, my warnings unheeded, my story forgotten or dismissed as the paranoid fantasies of a senile old man. But I do know this. The moon is waiting. It's been waiting for 54 years, patient and silent and eternal. And whatever is out there, beyond that ancient, airless rock, beyond the comfortable limits of our understanding and our science and our neat explanations, it's been waiting too. They're planning new missions, permanent bases with crews that rotate every 6 months, mining operations to extract water from polar craters and rare earth elements from the regolith, construction of a gateway station in lunar orbit that will serve as a waypoint for journeys deeper into the solar system. They're talking about establishing a sustainable human presence on the moon within 20 years, about building infrastructure and establishing supply chains, and eventually, someday, having children born there who will be the first generation of humanity to call another world home. 20 years, less than a generation. Children who are being born today will be young adults by the time we're back on the moon permanently. My great-grandchildren might be among them, might grow up in a world where living on the moon is as normal as living in Antarctica, or on an oil rig, or in any other extreme environment that humans have learned to inhabit. They don't know what's waiting for them, or maybe they do know, and they've decided it's worth the risk. Maybe the people making these decisions have access to information I was never privy to, classified files and reports that explain what we encountered and why we need to go back despite the risks. Maybe they've weighed the dangers against the potential benefits and concluded that we need to face whatever is out there, that hiding from it won't make it go away, that the only path forward is through understanding. Or maybe they're just as ignorant as I was in 1970, blissfully unaware that there are some frontiers we're not ready to cross, some doors we shouldn't open, some questions we shouldn't ask, because we won't like the answers. I won't live to see it. The cancer is winning its slow war against my body. I can feel it spreading, claiming new territory, shutting down systems one by one. The pain is worse now, even with the medication. I'm losing weight because food tastes like cardboard, and my stomach rebels against almost everything. I sleep in fits and starts, never more than an hour or two at a time. My body is telling me, in its own way, that it's time. But sometimes late at night when I'm staring at the ceiling and waiting for the pain medication to kick in, and knowing that sleep won't come anyway, I look out my bedroom window at that pale sphere hanging in the darkness, and I wonder what's looking back. I wonder if it's counting down the way those voices were always counting backward. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, counting down to what? To 0. To some event that will change everything. I have this terrible feeling that we're going to find out. And when we do, I hope we're ready for the answer. God help us. I hope we're ready. Last week, Michael helped me write my will. He brought his lawyer friend over, and we sat in my living room going through assets and beneficiaries and all the mundane details of dividing up a life. The house will go to Michael and Stephen, to split between them. My meagre savings, what's left after decades of modest living, will be divided among my grandchildren for their education. My personal effects, whatever anyone wants to keep. But I included specific instructions about one thing: the metal cash box buried in the basement crawl space. I told Michael exactly where it is, drew him a map, made him promise he'd retrieve it after I'm gone. I told him it should be sent to a reporter at the Washington Post, whose name I'd written down, someone who specializes in investigative journalism and has a reputation for taking conspiracy theories seriously and tracking them to their source, for finding truth in improbable places. "What's in the box?" Michael asked, studying the map I'd drawn. "Documentation, a recording, evidence of something that happened during my time at NASA, something that needs to be heard even if no one believes it." "Evidence of what?" "Something that was covered up. Something important. I can't explain more than that. Just promise me you'll send it to this reporter. Don't open it yourself. Don't listen to it. Just send it, along with a letter explaining its origin and my employment history." He looked at me with confusion and concern. "Dad, this sounds crazy, I know, but promise me anyway, please, it's important." He promised, though I could see he didn't understand. He probably thinks it's just old work records, documentation of some minor scandal or bureaucratic failure, nothing that would actually matter 50 years later. He has no idea that the box contains evidence of the most profound and terrifying discovery in human history, evidence that's been buried for over half a century. Or maybe the tape has degraded. Maybe the magnetic information has faded or become corrupted, and all he'll send is a cassette full of noise and static. Maybe my final act will be sending a reporter on a wild goose chase that goes nowhere, and I'll be remembered as a paranoid old man who wasted people's time with his delusions. But I had to try. I had to do something to ensure that this story doesn't die with me completely. Even if no one believes it, even if it gets filed away as a curiosity or a hoax, at least it will exist somewhere outside my failing memory. At least there will be some record that we encountered something inexplicable in April 1970, that people tried to warn others, that the cover-up wasn't completely successful. I made one other preparation. 3 weeks ago, on a day when Michael was at work and I was feeling strong enough to drive, I went to a copy shop and scanned Helen's list. The names, the dates, the causes of death, all 37 of them, each one a person who knew too much or saw too much or heard too much. I saved the file to a thumb drive, which I'm keeping in a safe deposit box along with my will and other important documents. The bank manager, a young woman who couldn't have been more than 30, asked me what was on the drive. I told her it was family photos, memories I wanted preserved for my grandchildren. Another lie to add to decades of lies, but what's one more at this point? I'm tired of lying. I'm tired of carrying this weight. I'm tired of looking at the moon and feeling fear instead of wonder. I'm tired of remembering those voices, of hearing them echo through my head in the quiet moments. I'm tired of being afraid of every car that drives too slowly past my house, every phone call from an unknown number, every unexpected visitor. But most of all, I'm tired of knowing something I can't share, of being powerless to warn people about dangers they don't believe exist, of watching humanity make the same mistakes we made in 1970, but on a larger scale with potentially catastrophic consequences. So I'm telling this story now, while I still can. I don't know if anyone will believe it. I don't know if it will make any difference. I don't know if my death will be natural or if, at the very end, they'll decide I'm too much of a risk and arrange an accident. A fall down the stairs, a medication error, a gas leak, something that looks natural enough that no one will question it. But I need to tell it. I need someone to know. I need to get this weight off my chest before I die. Need to pass this burden to someone else. Need to plant seeds of doubt and questions that might someday grow into understanding. What they told you about Apollo 13 was a convenient lie. A story so perfect, so heroic, so inspiring that no one questioned it. 3 men went to the moon, nearly died, and came home through a combination of their own courage and NASA's ingenuity. A triumph of the human spirit. a testament to what we can accomplish when we work together. The truth is something I've carried for 54 years. Something that's destroyed friendships and strained relationships and kept me awake more nights than I can count. The truth is that there's something out there, beyond the moon, beyond our understanding, beyond our carefully constructed models of how the universe should work. Something old, something strange, something that tried to warn us away and that we chose to ignore because facing it was too terrifying and admitting it would require us to completely reevaluate our place in the cosmos. We're going back to the moon within a decade, maybe sooner. We're going back with our technology and our ambition and our absolute certainty that we understand what we're doing. We're going back with our mining equipment and our construction materials and our plans for permanent bases and long-term occupation. But we don't understand. We don't know what we're walking into. We don't know what that door is, or why it's closing, or what happens when it finally shuts. We don't know what Father brought something back means, or if whatever he brought back is still here, hidden away somewhere, waiting. We don't know what wake it means, or what happens if we wake something that should have remained asleep. We don't know anything except that we were warned, and we chose not to listen. And now, 54 years later, we're choosing not to listen again. When the first permanent lunar base goes operational, when astronauts are living on the moon for months at a time, when we start mining and building and establishing a lasting presence on that ancient surface, I hope they'll be careful. I hope they'll watch for signs, listen for warnings, pay attention to anomalies and strange signals and things that don't make sense. I hope they'll remember that space is not empty, that silence is not the same as absence, that just because we don't understand something doesn't mean it isn't there. I hope they'll approach the unknown with humility instead of arrogance, with caution instead of recklessness, with respect instead of the colonial mindset that's driven human expansion for centuries. But I don't think they will remember. I think they'll push forward with the same confidence we had in 1970, the same certainty that we're the masters of our destiny and nothing can stop us, the same inability to learn from history because history has been classified and buried and systematically erased. And maybe they'll be right. Maybe whatever is out there is harmless, or long gone, or was never real to begin with. Maybe my entire career has been haunted by equipment malfunction and coincidence and the paranoid fantasies of a mind that couldn't handle the stress of the Apollo 13 rescue, that turned normal events into a conspiracy because that was easier than accepting that sometimes bad things happen for no reason. I wish I could believe that. God, how I wish I could believe that. I wish I could dismiss my own memories as unreliable, could explain away the 37 deaths as coincidence, could convince myself that Leonard and Helen and all the others were just unlucky rather than systematically eliminated. But I heard those voices. I recorded them. I documented them. And I watched people die, one by one, over the course of decades. Too many people, under too many suspicious circumstances, all connected to one event in April 1970. That's not coincidence. That's not paranoia. That's evidence of something real, something dangerous, something that powerful people have worked very hard to keep hidden for over half a century. My name is Walter Brennan. I'm 83 years old, and I'm dying. I worked at NASA during the Apollo program, and I was there during the Apollo 13 rescue. I heard things I wasn't supposed to hear. I learned things I wasn't supposed to know. And I've spent 54 years watching over my shoulder, updating my list, wondering when my turn would come. That day is coming soon. Maybe the cancer will take me naturally. Maybe I'll have an accident in my final weeks. I don't know which it will be, and at this point, I'm too tired to care. I've lived longer than most of the others on my list. I've seen my children grow up, met my grandchildren, had a good marriage and a decent career, and more years than many people get. But I'm leaving this story behind, this testament, this warning, and I'm leaving the tape buried in my basement, waiting to be discovered and sent to someone who might actually listen. To whoever finds this story, whoever reads these words, please understand that I'm not crazy. I'm not delusional. I'm not suffering from dementia or paranoid delusions or any other convenient explanation. I was there. I heard what I heard. I saw what I saw. And I documented it all as carefully and thoroughly as I could, knowing that someday someone might need to know. We are not alone. We have never been alone. And the next time we reach out into the darkness, we need to be prepared for what reaches back. Turn back. Be careful, the door is closing, and we don't know what's on the other side. Or worse, we do know, and we've decided to ignore the warnings and open it anyway. God help us all. God help the people who go back to the moon. God help humanity as we stumble forward into the darkness, ignorant and arrogant and certain that nothing can hurt us because we're special, because we're chosen, because we're destined to inherit the stars. We're not special. We're children playing with fire, and eventually we're going to get burned. This is Walter Brennan signing off for the last time. May God have mercy on us all for what we're about to do. The moon is waiting, and whatever is beyond it is waiting too. And we, in our infinite foolishness, are about to give it exactly what it wants. Turn back while you still can. Please, turn back.